Yep, okay. Ha! The internet dropped. Sorry about that. Okay. It's so lame when that happens. The internet has been awful lately, the past few days. Apparently it went out a couple times, I guess. Because I'm looking at my, video producer. And, there's 16 minutes and then 14 seconds, so. Started up 14 seconds ago, so. Hopefully it doesn't do it again. But we're gonna go back a page or so. Battle cries and steel impacting steel burst through the air. They both leaped from the water, not even taking the time to dress. They grabbed up their clothes, bows and quivers and swords, sprinting out of the women's section of the springs. The spring was unusual, being the two sections were far from one another. Nearly half a mile. No one had been using it because of the war, so they'd all voted to help themselves to a relaxing evening. They'd beaten back General Hardin's men from the area only days before, so thought it safe. It seemed only temporary. They arrived in only enough time to hear the hooves of horses fleeing. The fight had been over that quickly. As they came in sight of the spring, only horrors awaited them. Dead bodies were floating in the water, and many others had made it out of the spring, only to be cut down soon after. Coral took a step forward, but Toki grabbed her arm, pointing to a figure in the distance, bent down, looking at the ground. A brown cloak concealed his identity. All Toki could make out was the man's beard. Perhaps he was foreign. His unusual sword stood out and might have been forged in Moira, General Hardin's homeland. This made it most likely that the man was one of his soldiers, perhaps left behind to finish any survivors. Toki raised her bow, nocked an arrow, and pulled against the string. Coral placed a hand on her arm, shaking her head, and Toki retreated into cover before the man could turn around to see her. "Why did you stop me?" she whispered. "One man isn't worth exposing ourselves. Look, he's leaving. Our priority must be to help any survivors, and then tracking down the enemy soldiers responsible." Toki nodded. Coral was right, of course, and she never disobeyed an order from her, regardless. She was the Owl Company commander, after all. The only female commander in Velmar's entire armed forces, and the best archer in perhaps all the kingdoms. She knew once the adrenaline dump was over, Coral would take this hard. Many of these men had been with her for years, survived bloody battles. The man mounted his horse and rode off toward those who had just attacked them. Once he was well out of sight, Toki and Coral ran to the hot spring. They ran to body after body. The battle went down too quickly. There had to be survivors. There were more than a dozen men here. Frantically, they continued, checking each man for signs of life before darting to the next. In just a few minutes, it was clear. Not one man had survived. Coral stood silently, looking over all of them. Mido, Jabari, Horace, there. Coral dropped to her knees. It was the first time Toki had ever seen her cry. "Coral!" Toki shouted, running to her and wrapping her arms around her. "You can go, Toki," she whispered in her ear. "There is no more Owl Company. You're free. Go home." Toki pushed her away. "Never. My home is with you." "You won't even draw that sword, Toki. You're an excellent archer, but..." "And your best tracker. I also know herbs and medicines. As long as it isn't just you, there's still an Owl Company. You and I." Coral embraced her friend. "You're right, Toki. Thank you. I wouldn't blame you if you wanted to go, but I'm glad to have you with me. You're all I have left." "Always," Toki said, though she wanted to say so much more. She wanted to tell her that she would always be with her, that she would die for her, that she loved her so much. The opportunity to say such a thing had passed. It would have to wait. For how long, she didn't know. She would wait as long as it took. "Then it's time to put our tracking skills to the test. Let's get dressed. We'll need to track them while we can, and hopefully we'll take the first opportunity to buy horses." "Shouldn't we bury them?" Toki asked. She had never really cared for any of them, at least not the way Coral had. Coral had loved them as a family. They were like her brothers. Though, unlike the others back in the city, they'd at least grown to respect her. In the early days, when she'd just been purchased to assist the company with menial tasks, the men would often tease her about her appearance and call her names. While Coral wasn't around, of course. One day, she overheard the name calling and made each man shave his head as punishment. Long hair was important to the men of Velmar, and this was humiliating. Yet, they did so without a single word of argument against their commander. She warned them that the next time she caught them, it would be their beards. It was the last time they ever bullied Toki. The crows will take care of their bodies. We will avenge their souls. In Toki's homeland, across the sea, they would execute a commander for saying such a thing. Not burying the dead meant their soul could never rest. Here, in Velmar, the body is a mere vessel, buried only for reasons of sanitation. Once the soul is gone, the body needs nothing anymore. The more courageous and ferocious the warrior, the greater his reward in death. I understand, Toki tried. Deep down, she wanted to argue, but she kept that part of herself deep down. She never argued with Coral, regardless of the reason. She vowed always to obey her, though she kept that vow to herself. Coral wouldn't have approved. The two rushed to dress themselves and help each other tighten their armor. Toki walked over to the horse tracks and dropped her hands and knees, scrutinizing them. It is as we suspected, between 15 and 18 horses. No enemy soldiers dead. They approached quietly. Most likely they heard the charge when we did, and no one had time to prepare. There are no footprints on the ground belonging to the enemy, and no arrows in the dead. They use spears. This is Hardin's cavalry unit. The first finger of Hardin's fist, his cavalry, archers, swordsmen, and a mystery unit. None of them have ever lost a battle, or so the rumors would have us believe. This is the third week that we've not seen regular troop activity. Our intelligence said all of Hardin's troops are being withdrawn by the Moiran king. This only supports that. But why has Hardin disobeyed the order? And why has his sudden shift to guerrilla warfare? It doesn't make any sense. Does he believe he could take over the entire kingdom with only his core units? More likely that he just wants to do as much damage as possible before he leaves. Or maybe he's in disagreement with the king about withdrawing his troops, Toki said. None of that matters. If this is how they want to do things, we will track them down and assassinate each unit's commander. We'll see how he enjoys a taste of his own cowardly tactics. You and I will best him at his own game and give our brothers peace. Toki nodded. Then we'll head east with the tracks. There's a farm on the way. We'll borrow 2 horses. This is your last chance to back out, Toki. Once you leave here with me, I'll be counting on you too much. Then count on me. Let's go. And that's the end of chapter 1. So already, we are fighting. All right. So, let us go ahead. Oh wait, we'll wait like 3 minutes, I guess. Go ahead and take an ad break, I suppose. I wish I could like manual do ads that way so I could do it in between chapters, because it's kind of weird. But you know. Let me see. Hey, thank you for following Thad20. Thank you, thank you, thank you. How are you? Thank you for visiting my channel. Again, we're reading A Kiss of Iron and You by Mr. Belgath. It's a Yuri light novel. And we're going to talk for a few minutes while the ads roll, because ads are ads. I did lose connection earlier, which kind of sucks. So lame. The internet's been awful. We might be thinking of, it'll be hard, but we're thinking of switching to something else. But, I mean, to have to rerun lines and everything, and that would be awful. I hate it. I don't want to do it. I don't like strange people being in my house and under my house. Too bad I can't run my own line. Can I run my own line? Probably not. Tomorrow, we're going to actually finish Art of Belinda Sunday. We are going to finish my cutie pie little donations panel that I started yesterday. Unfortunately not. Yeah, I know. But I think I have just the, or I absolutely would say. But I think I have just the panel part left. Like the text part, the little box. And then like I'm going to decorate the box. It's super cool. If you have not seen it, go ahead and go check it out. I am an artist, so every Sunday we do Art of Belinda Sunday. I have decided that I am going to take the whole next week off because I am going to karate college this weekend, starting Thursday. And so since I've been streaming on Mondays and Thursdays during camp week, well, I stream Monday, Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday during camp, so I won't be able to stream Saturday, or Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday. Goodness gracious, I can't speak. Then I figured I might as well just take Monday off too. Because camp is tiring. It's 9 hours of camp, and then I don't have anything prepped for Thursday's camp, so I'm gonna have to think about what we could do, and I might have to start staying behind. That's unfortunate. Alright. I think we made it through the ad break. Yay. Okay, so chapter 2. Coral marveled at Toki's tracking skills. She wanted to know more about how she learned them, but Toki never spoke of her life before arriving on Velmar's shores. No matter how many times she'd ask, even in the mud, Toki could gauge the depth of a horse's hoof and know the speed of travel based on the average horse's weight. She could tell how tired the horse was, based on its stride, even the skill of the rider, based on how well it adhered to the path. No doubt they would not be expecting pursuit. With the rarity of women in Velmar's armed forces, they likely didn't expect survivors either. Seems like they're heading through the same farms we are, Toki said, burying her hand in the mud. This isn't good. If the farmers try to resist, then... Toki nodded. General Hardin is a terrible man, and it seems his men are no better. Aww. Well, now there's an ad break. Why did it take like a whole minute for the ad to start? I thought that we had already gone through it. But we did not. At least it's only a minute left. We'll just start chapter 2 over. Okay, I know, right? I probably didn't like the fact that I skipped an ad. Silly ads. I know, just karate chop at Raccoon Karate Chop. Judo top. I do have a VGen though for my commissions talking about art again. I think I'm gonna sneeze. Oh, I did. Judo chop Twitch, yes. It'd be nice if like you could just turn off ads for a stream. But I think even if you turn off ads, you get the ads anyway because you're an affiliate. So, lame. Alright, so we're going to start chapter 2 over again because I don't like to be interrupted. Coral marveled at Toki's tracking skills. She wanted to know more about how she learned them, but Toki never spoke of her life before arriving on Velmar's shores. No matter how many times she'd ask, even in the mud, Toki could gauge the depth of a horse's hoof and know the speed of travel based on the average horse's weight. She could tell how tired the horse was based on its stride. Even the skill of the rider, based on how well it adhered to the path. No doubt they would not be expecting pursuit. With the rarity of women in Velmar's armed forces, they likely didn't expect survivors either. Seems like they're heading through the same farms we are, Toki said, burying her hand in the mud. This isn't good. If the farmers try to resist, then... Toki nodded. General Hardin is a terrible man, and it seems his men are no better. At least the necromancers are no more, based on our intel. The undead thralls we've been facing have dwindled to nearly nothing, so it seems to be true. Good riddance, Coral said, venom on her tongue. I'm sure not all necromancers are bad. Weren't many of them scholars? Toki asked. So they say. If it weren't for so many of them being slaughtered by their own traitors, I'd have believed it was only a cover. If there were any good necromancers, I'd wager they died sooner than later. Toki nodded again. 15 to 17 horses. One pursues from farther behind. Our rear guardsman we spotted earlier, no doubt. He must be skilled. We'll have to be cautious of him. But, if possible, we should take him out before assassinating their commander, Coral said, ripping off her Velmari uniform insignia and throwing it into the mud. Toki stood up straight. Coral was always so strict on appearance and decorum. To throw her insignia in the mud like that would likely bring heavy punishment. What are you doing? Toki asked. From now on, you and I are ghosts who ride the wind. We will kill and retreat until either we are caught and killed ourselves or until there's no one left for our arrows. Toki reached for hers and did the same. She'd have followed Coral to the grave if that's what she wanted, which is where this journey might ultimately take them. For Coral, it was only a matter of how many she could take with her. We won't be able to catch up if they pass through, but if they stop there or get held up for any reason, we may. Coral smiled. Then let's get moving. Let no one tell you that running in a little mud is just as easy as running on dry ground. It isn't. Each step, especially while running, is hazardous and slippery. It becomes difficult to keep your boots on. It splashes up the legs of your trousers, making your clothing heavier. When that gets wet enough, armor slips and becomes misaligned, compromising protection. Not to mention the supremely uncomfortable feeling of wet undergarments. After nearly an hour of running, Toki and Coral were struggling to find it in them to keep up the pace. The will was certainly there, but the body is only capable of so much. How much further? Toki asked, having her held back the veiled complaint for as long as she could. Oh, what's the matter? Your skinny legs giving out? Coral teased, increasing the pace. My legs aren't skinny, Coral shouted behind her, pressing the catch back up. Look at all that air you still have in your lungs. You're totally fine to keep going without a break, Coral said, once Toki caught up beside her. But if you really want to know, I'm guessing we're almost there. Do you remember when I taught you about using your bow in the rain? It affects distance more than accuracy, so I need to compensate by closing in. I waxed the string this morning, even though we weren't expecting a fight, just as you taught me, Toki replied, hoping this would make Coral proud. Did you hear that? Coral asked, slowing her run. They could hear a rumble in the distance. At first, Toki thought they happened upon the fighting, but it seemed the opposite was true. As the village came into sight, only the sound of thunder echoed and hung uncomfortably long in the air. There was no other sound to drown them out. It's just thunder, Toki said, sounding as though she was reassuring herself more than Coral. Let's slow down. We're walking into a downpour, and either we've already missed the battle, or one never occurred, Coral observed. Do you think the farmers cooperated? Coral didn't answer. Instead, she slowed to a walk, relaxing her stride. Her amber eyes scanned every inch of the approaching structures, looking for any sign a battle had taken place. As they approached, a young man peeked his head out of the village gate and quickly shrank back inside. His dark skin gave him away as Velmari. He was Velmari, Toki noted. But he could follow the instructions of the enemy. You must treat him that way until he gives you a reason to do otherwise. Toki swallowed hard. The thought of killing a Velmari citizen by mistake made her skin crawl, even if they forced her to do so, and even if it was under the orders of her own commander. Toki began to ask a question, but forgot what she was going to ask before she could form the words. A nervous habit. One of her many. What? Coral teased. Coral knew all her flaws better than anyone and showed her the most understanding. Yet, when the opportunity arose to tease her, Coral grasped it like it was the most important thing she'd ever do. She called it character building. A little teasing would toughen her up, she often said. Never mind, Toki said. Just really hoping we don't have to fight your people besides the enemy. That would make an already terrible day even worse. Your people too, Coral scolded. Just because you look different doesn't mean you aren't Velmari. If anyone says different, I'll punch them in the nose. That includes you, so don't say it again. Toki hung her head, gripping the bow tightly. How much easier would it be if she truly was Velmari? It was bad enough that she was a woman, and Velmar's culture frowned upon those relationships. But if there was one thing the Velmari people hated even more, it was the romantic mingling with foreigners. And she wasn't just any foreigner. Okay, that includes thinking it, Toki, Coral said, reaching out and pinching Toki's arm. Ow! How did you know what I was thinking about anyway? Toki said, rubbing her arm and glaring at Coral. I know you better than you think. Don't forget that. I could practically see those negative thoughts running around and bumping into each other inside that head of yours. They need to clear the way. We're almost at the gate, and anything could happen. Toki nodded, forcing a smile. Got it. Coral smiled back, and Toki nearly melted. Coral's eyes, no matter how many times she looked into them, she could never resist being pulled in. Amber eyes were all that uncommon in Velmar, but Coral's were so bright, they almost glowed. Toki, Coral scolded again. Oh man, she noticed. Of course she did. Right, Toki said, slapping her cheek with her free hand. The way is clear. This time she looked straight ahead as they arrived at the gate. Coral banged on it with her fist. Nothing. She banged on it again, and then waited. Should we leave? Maybe sneak around the side? Toki asked, her voice lowered. No, now that we've given ourselves away and they know we're here, they'll be monitoring us. If they catch us sneaking around, it could get ugly, especially if Hardin's cavalry had been spooked already. No, in this case, a direct approach is best. Understood, Toki said. Coral banged on the gate much harder this time. Commander Coral Sumari, I demand access to this village now, she shouted. A small window opened, and the familiar young man peering through. And I'm Commander Big Ears Little Toes. We've had enough pale-skinned visitors today, so at least leave your pet outside, then we can talk. Coral's hand shot through the window, catching the man by the throat. You'd refer to an owl company lieutenant as a pet? With that kind of boldness, you'd best be a prince of the king himself if you expect to keep your head attached to your shoulders. The man choked at first, then spit through the window. Landing shy of Coral's face, it ran down her shoulder. Seeing Coral treated this way made Toki's blood boil, but she'd grown accustomed to controlling her emotions. Rather than lash out, she tried to de-escalate. Coral's temper was prone to flare into an inferno, and things would go south in a hurry. I don't mind. I can wait outside. You could just go in and secure our horses, then we'll be on our way. That doesn't get to me, I promise. I could take a few mean words from a farmer. It gets to me, Toki. Owl Company is wiped out. The Moirans talked openly about their frustrations at having to leave the corpses behind. Blamed an interruption. Go impersonate them somewhere else, the man said, catching them both by surprise. Interruption? Does he mean us? Toki asked. Coral released the man's neck, reaching into her pocket and pulling out her commander's seal, pressing it to the opening, letting it do the rest of the talking for her. Impossible. We arrived after they already attacked, Coral said, shaking her head. But the swordsman. He must have heard and feared that there'd be a counterattack, so caught up with his allies and warned them. So that means... Coral nodded. They probably didn't linger here. How do I know this seal isn't fake? You know about the attack, so maybe you pocketed it off the actual commander's corpse. Besides, I've never seen a female officer in the Velmar military, much less the elite units. Coral sighed, pressing her hand against her forehead. Then just tell us that the foreigners have passed through and gone, she said, the weight of the day finally taking a toll on her voice. She sounded defeated, as expected. Defeated is exactly what they were. You just missed them. They collected our corpses and spare horses, but soon left after because of commotion outside. Coral's eyes met Toki's with renewed hope. Commotion? She asked the man. Yeah, on the other side of the village. Go check it out because we haven't. But forget about coming in here if you and the slave are joined at the hip. Coral slammed her fist through the hole and found its mark with a volume that made Toki's skin tingle with surprise. Be thankful it wasn't an arrow, she mumbled before turning her attention to Toki. Forget it. We've wasted enough time here. We investigate whatever this commotion was and continue pursuit. The sun is setting, but I better not hear a single complaint about being tired. Aye, Commander, Toki shouted, saluting. That's the end of chapter 2. Thought my internet was going to drop for a second. My my uploading speed seemed to have dropped a little bit. It choked for a second there. Yeah, it did. It certainly did. A little bit lame. I hope it doesn't go down. It seems to be all right after a little bit. I don't know. But so many businesses had the internet drop too. It's wild. I think there's something going on. Maybe they've been working on something. I don't know. But anyway, chapter 3. Coral didn't say a word as the two moved around the village, and Toki was reluctant to address the most alarming part of the villager's story. About what that man said, Toki started. I'm sick of it, Toki. You fought for this kingdom just as hard as anyone else, Coral said, spitting on the ground as they walked. She was still seething over those comments, so much so that she apparently forgot about everything else. I'm all right. As long as you feel that way, I don't care what anyone else thinks. But don't you think it's strange what they took from the villagers? Coral sighed. She'd been paying attention after all. I didn't want to think about it. If they're taking corpses, it means we may not be rid of the necromancers after all. But General Hardin seems to be stranded here, having been cut off from the usual supply of intel from Moira. That means there's a good chance he isn't aware that the remaining necromancers are gone. He may be collecting corpses, hoping to smuggle them back into Moira, or hoping he'll be able to smuggle his necromancer out. Or he has one here that we weren't aware of, Toki said. Or, Toki the always negative, he has one here that we weren't aware of. In which case, we're able to identify who that is. Assassinating them will become our top priority. But what if... Oh my, look! The two quickened their pace, now wishing they weren't so quickly losing what little daylight remained. At least a dozen of General Hardin's elite cavalry lay dead on the ground. They'd been watering their horses at a stream that passed by the village. These are fresh kills, Coral said, bending down and turning one man over, pressing her fingers to his neck. But perhaps we'll catch a break here. Check them all. If any are alive, we will interrogate them. Toki began checking the men. Something isn't right. What happened? Why are a dozen of General Hardin's most elite men dead in what must have been minutes? An enemy of my enemy, Toki. Don't worry about it. Just check them and we'll sort the rest out later. Now isn't the time to play investigator. Toki swallowed hard, embarrassed. Right. At last, the two had their first stroke of luck. This one's alive, Toki. Come here. Put pressure on this wound, Coral said, pulling up the buckles on the man's breastplate, freeing him from it and tossing it aside. The two stared at the wound. A clean cut through solid steel. Battle axe? Toki mused quietly as she frantically attempted to stop the bleeding from the enormous wound. A task that would prove impossible. Slowing it would have to be good enough. Coral put her finger to her lips, shushing Toki before turning to the man who was stirring now, though he was in tremendous pain. Who isn't? I can't see. Coral shook her head at Toki, again, signaling her to keep quiet. I'm a farmer from the village. I was just collecting water. We're trying to help. It was a demon. A monster, the man said, choking. Water. Coral nodded toward a canteen lying on the ground, then to Toki. Toki removed the lid, drizzling it into the man's mouth. He swallowed a little, choking on the rest momentarily before pushing it away. A demon? A monster? What do you mean? He asked where Hardin was. We drew our swords. It was only seconds. Cut us down like nothing. Like we were lads. Toki and Coral locked eyes, unable to make sense of anything the man was saying. A Velmari warrior? The man rocked his head gently, coughing violently. No, one of us, I think. Wait, why are you asking me? The man's words came between the gurgling of blood. It was almost too difficult to make anything out. His breathing became more and more labored. He was taking his final breaths. Tell. He struggled to take one last breath, but it was all he could manage. His arms fell limp. Coral sighed, easing the man's head down. Internal conflict. Most likely he is confused about how things went down, as soldiers often are. Perhaps a disagreement with the man asking where Hardin was. To report it? Coral said, still on her knees next to the man. If that's the case, why didn't he recognize the man? Toki asked, still fixated on the wound. I don't know. I only wish I knew the name or names of whoever was responsible so I can buy them a drink, Coral said, rising to her feet. Either way, this doesn't help us other than wishing them luck. Check the tracks. Toki reluctantly ended her examination of the wound, crouching down and studying the surrounding tracks. They're hard to see. The moonlight isn't clear enough tonight. There are a lot of horse tracks that lead to the scene, then away from it. There's only one set of footprints next to where the horses pass. One man dismounted to check for survivors and missed the one we found. When the rest of the group happened upon it, it was already over, Toki observed. Which means this went down quicker than we originally thought. What else? Toki paused, looking toward the other side of the stream. There's a set of tracks that leads across. They belong to a large man, not wounded, but in a hurry. The attacker? Or someone fleeing, but we'll never find them in the forest at night. If they're smart, they'll ambush us by sound. Our priority remains the primary group. Toki nodded. Right, they've moved on back to the road, further north. Don't think too much of it. The road split ahead, and they may intend to circle back. They may go into the forest to set up camp. A group will be safer to approach. There'll be fires, noise, and smells. We can take out a few and escape if we're careful. Right. It seems that the main party took the spare horses belonging to these men. We're at least half an hour behind them already. They'll sleep. We won't. Not yet. I want a nice bath before bed. Right, Toki said, her voice drifting. Coral stood quietly for a moment, staring at Toki. Go ahead. You have something you want to say. I want you to say it. You always go along everything I say, even when you disagree. Now isn't the time for that. If you have something to say, then say it. Toki rubbed her arm. It's just, shouldn't we report back to the capital and request reinforcements? Coral sighed. Well, that would be the logical thing to do. However, we have to consider the king's position, as well as what we could practically expect from such a request. The economy is thriving again, and now that the announcement of Moira's withdrawal has spread. If he were to send out an army, it would undo that progress and make the people lose trust in his decrees. But let's say he agrees. We are several days ride away. Do you know precisely where we should tell him to send his reinforcements against these small elite units? Oh, and how do you think he'll handle Owl Company's complete failure? With those last words, Toki understood what Coral was really trying to say. By Owl Company's failure, what you really mean is yours. That's what bothers you the most, isn't it? Coral, there's nothing you could have done. Coral clenched her fist. We should have never stopped at that hot spring. It was my decision. My mistake as our commander that left my men sitting ducks for slaughter. I'll never be able to show my face in the capital until I right that wrong. For me, that's nothing less than hardened commanders' heads. I have nothing left but that. You have me. Toki walked over to Toki, wrapping her arms around her. I have you, and I can't do this without you. Toki stood rigid, too surprised by Coral's sudden display of affection to react. She'd always tease her, and was a very touchy-feely kind of person, but this was the first time she'd ever hug her this way. I'll never leave your side, Toki said. Never. Coral took a step back, smiling. Then let's waste no more time. Let's see how far they can go in this darkness. The two of them moved quickly, still on foot. It was apparent to them now that they would have saved time had they gone back for their own horses at the stables. Far too late to worry about that. For nearly an hour, they trudged through the chilly air and slick mud of the road before Toki realized the prince suddenly veered off into the woods. She clutched Coral's shoulders, pointing in their direction. It was so sudden that she nearly missed them. Coral drew an arrow from her quiver and rested it against the string of her bow, waiting for Toki to do the same. They crouched down and walked slowly, carefully to avoid branches and twigs on the ground that might give them away. The leaves were wet, which allowed them to move more stealthily than they would have been able to otherwise. The clouds had shifted, allowing the moonlight to shine through more clearly, at least for the time being. Conditions were improving. It would be easy to loose an arrow into a well-lit camp and retreat, but only once. If any were foolish enough to pursue them, they could take more, but that was not a given. They'd have the first shot count. They could hear the sound of conversation ahead of them. Then a shout echoed, breaking the tone of chatter that had preceded it. Assassin! The man shouted. Toki and Coral froze in place, looking around. Had someone spotted them? Impossible. The voice was too far away. They weren't even in sight of the camp yet. Find him! Another roared. Coral grabbed Toki by the arm. I don't know what's happening, but we can't let this opportunity go to waste. If the commander's still alive, it'll be easier to single him out if everyone's swarming close to him. We will fire through them, and one of our arrows will probably find home. I'll follow your lead, Toki whispered. Coral broke out into a sprint, the commotion now loud enough to drown out any noise that they made. They could close the distance quickly, and they had to if they wanted to seize this chance. A few seconds later, and the fires of the camp were in sight. Now to identify and take out the commander. And that's the end of chapter 3. Seems like we're doing pretty okay on the internet now. Kind of lame that my stream is going to be split up now. Usually, I like to directly upload things to YouTube, so I just have to do part 1. Aw, thank you for joining, Kara. Thank you so much. I hope you all are enjoying the narration, story reading today. If you would like to check it out, it unpinned itself. If you would like to check out the book... Oh, that's because the stream ended. Gosh. Let me just put it in chat. If you would like to check out the book, I'm going to pin it again. It's by Mr. Brogath. And there's a whole series. This is the 3rd book in the series. If you want to listen to the other books in the series, I do have it on my YouTube channel. So make sure you check that out. There we go. Now, hey, well, thank you for pinning it. Mr. Brogath was quick on the draw there. Alright, so chapter 4. Speed pin. That's almost as fast as when I pin yours and stream in the mornings, when I'm around anyway. Before I left for work, and now I leave before you even stream in the mornings. I gotta get up early. Chapter 4. Toki and Coral slowed as they neared the tree line of a hill overlooking the camp. From there, they'd have the high ground, and trajectory would be less of an issue when firing through a crowd. An ideal position to land a precise killing shot. However, once they came to a stop and readied their bows, they only saw a few men frantically trying to calm horses. It wasn't clear whether they were trying to mount them or simply stop them from running away in the commotion, but these men were decidedly alone. The commotion could still be heard outside the camp, further away than before. They could hear shouting and the clashing of steel. Let no opportunity go to waste, Coral said, loosing an arrow in the neck of one man. He clutched at it, slumping slowly to his knees. The other man hadn't even noticed in the chaos of what was happening. Toki released her own arrow, striking another man in the chest. This man stumbled, falling onto his back and going limp almost immediately. The 3rd man looked up and saw them, but did not shout. This told the women all they needed to know. No one was nearby who could come to his rescue, and he knew it. He ran, abandoning the horses for the darkness of the forest. He got away, Toki whispered. However, Coral ignored her, already pulling back her arrow, and released it after careful aim. The sound of an arrow striking flesh was unmistakable, and could be heard even from this distance. Coral had found her mark. They didn't call her the finest archer in the kingdom for nothing. That should have been impossible for virtually everyone, even Toki, who was a decent archer herself. Nice shot, Toki nearly shouted, eager to praise Coral's skill. We have to catch up to the fighting. Whoever's fighting these cavalrymen, we have to help them, Coral said, motioning for Toki to follow as she ran down the hill toward the noises. They could hear fewer and fewer voices as they closed in until there were none. They missed the fighting again, but by mere minutes this time. The moonlight shone down, peeking through the thick trees. Already, men lay dead on the ground. Some of their torches had gone out, but some still burned. Take a torch, Toki. I will cover you should anyone appear, Coral said. Toki obeyed, picking up the brightest one she could see and holding it up. The sight was shocking. In almost a neat, straight line, a man lay dead on the ground, every 10 to 20 strides, like clockwork. Toki was again fixated on the wounds these men wore. Powerful strikes had cut through their armor as though they'd been wearing none, but a heavy axe wielded by a brutish amateur had not inflicted them. They were precise. 1 strike per man. No wasted motion. Not 1 strike had failed to kill. Toki's mind drifted further and further away from the scene in front of them, and she struggled to give any more of her attention to the corpses before her. Amazing, Toki mumbled aloud. What was that? Toki, are you all right? Coral said, putting a hand on her shoulder. I'm fine, she said, breaking free of the distractions clouding her mind. Our friends do find work, it seems. I'm guessing halberds with a long spear at the head, held by a skilled hand. They baited a charge for men who were used to fighting on horseback and dealt with them handily. Eagle Company, if I had to guess, though fighting at night isn't really their style. Perhaps they met a similar fate as us, and a few of them are hunting Hardin's men as well. Toki bent down, examining the tracks further and further they went. With the pursuit and fighting, it was hard to tell how many participants there were. This may go on for a while. Should we keep following? She asked. No, we don't have the time. Let's go back to the commander's tent. He may be hiding there with guards. We also want to secure a few horses before any survivors who may be hidden flee with them. Though I'm more than willing to do it, we can't keep up this kind of pace on foot and expect to keep up. If the commander fled, we need those horses. If he's still here, we need to kill him quickly or search him if he's already dead. Toki nodded, rising to her feet and walking with Coral back to the camp. The quiet was eerie now. The horses were still tied up, 14 in total. Coral nodded to Toki as she dropped the torch in the mud, allowing it to go out, drawing her bow. They approached the larger tent in the center of the camp. Only a few had gone up, and the rest lay unassembled on the ground. They'd been caught amid setting up. Toki held out an arrow, opening the flap of the tent quickly. Nothing. No response from the inside. Coral poked her head through, looking around before disappearing inside. Toki followed. A man was sitting in a chair at a table, ran through with a similar single wound. He had not been given the time to rise to meet his attacker. Toki shuddered. That insignia. He's our commander, Toki. Search him. A lantern sat burning on the table, with plenty of oil remaining. He'd likely only just sat down, probably to read through his communication or make plans for their next strike. Either would be invaluable to Coral and Toki. Toki rifled through his coat pockets, pulling out a tin of tobacco and a smoking pipe and placing it on the table. In another pocket, an insignia mark similar to the one Coral carried. A trophy, Coral said, taking it from Toki's hand and examining it. We may be able to bluff that we have a hostage using this, though they likely wouldn't believe us. Toki nodded. No, probably not. I can't believe he has nothing else on him. She rifled through several more pockets before pulling out a drawing. It looked like a child had drawn it. Toki wished she'd never seen it. He may have been a simple monster to them, but to someone, somewhere, this man was a husband and apparently a father, too. She placed it on the table, though facing down. And now we have an ad break. So I'll just take a quick water break now. Well, it did. I must have missed the snooze on this one. But that's all right. All that water tried to get down the wrong side of the throat. When I take my break in a half an hour, I'll probably have to refill it. Goodness gracious. It messed me up. I don't know why it messed me up so bad. Then again, I think, like I said earlier, I think I have a sinus infection going on. Probably from being outside so much. I don't have any allergies, but I have a hard time. I think the pollen bothers me. But anyway, you know, I think the pollen bothers everyone, regardless of whether or not you have allergies or not. It's awful. All right. Now we can continue. Let's see. There we go. Coral mused, rubbing her chin. Could he have hidden it away or sent it away with his men in his dying breaths, Toki said, finishing Coral's thought for her. Let's search them, Coral said, stamping out of the tent. The search of the two men killed next to the horses produced little. Toki stepped several strides into the woods, finding the third man, an arrow short expertly into his back, through light so dim she'd barely been able to make him out. Coral was truly exceptional with the bow, perhaps the best archer in all Nathalos, Toki reasoned. Before coming back empty-handed once again, she shrugged to Coral. Though Coral wore a smile that gave away her own search was not as fruitless. She held up a leather pouch and pulled out a document, taking a few steps toward the camp's fire and reading it carefully. Toki sat on a log, waiting quietly, still pondering the wounds she'd seen. Something wasn't right about them. Well, look what we have here. Our fortune has finally turned, Toki. Hardin's forces may yet face justice. It was not what Toki had wanted to hear. For Coral's sake, she had hoped this would be a dead end. that they would wander around. Sonny pressed the button. He decided to rub against the keyboard and press the button. He's joined me again. That may make my model freak out. I gotta find where it was. That they would wander around a few more days on foot before losing the trail and returning home, defeated. They still had their lives. She still had Coral. These men had treated Toki with an uneasy tolerance, but never genuine kindness. The thought of losing them was not a pleasant one, but if she lost Coral, that she did not want to think about. She would never let that happen. "Oh, what have you found?" she asked, before noticing the bloody prints on the page. It seemed someone else was able to read it before discarding it, allowing these men to take it with them in their attempt to escape. It may have been the commander's hand, perhaps another's. This was too large to be delivered by bird, so it must have been delivered by a courier recently, likely before they encountered us this morning. They're wearing thin and running low on supplies. The campaign is threatened, but Hardin intends to continue it to the very end. He believes he can still win. Maybe he's insane. The letter isn't from Hardin, but the commander of the archery unit. They are merging. Seems like they have planned to meet north, just beyond the next village, and at the base of Tusk Mountain. They have a strategic location surrounded by stone and cliff on all sides. They aren't afraid at all, Toki said. Not necessarily. It's that, or they have nothing left to lose. They're desperate. Look at what happened to these cavalrymen. Perhaps they don't want to be cut down on their travels and decided it's best to hold somewhere they can at least defend themselves until reinforcement arrives. They will watch all entrances in the surrounding cliff carefully. Where does that leave us? Toki asked, hoping against hope it meant going back to the capital and reporting to the king. But of course, she knew better. If one of these cliffs has a clear view of the camp, but obscured from the view of other cliffs, we may yet accomplish our goal. Likely they'll be comfortable, and if we move quickly, they won't suspect anything has happened. We need to scout it out and make a plan. If the other Velmari unit is also heading there, perhaps we'll meet them on our way. I'm not sure if it was the unit, Coral. I think it might have been... She hesitated, knowing how crazy the statement would sound if she spoke it aloud. Oh, what do you think it was? Are you trying to say one single person did this? If it were magic, that would be one thing. Toki shook her head. No, I'm probably mistaken. These weren't magical wounds. Then let's gather 4 horses. Our next target is kind enough to wait for us, so we'll catch a few hours of sleep. In a camp full of dead men? Toki asked. Coral smiled. Surrounded by the corpses of those who just killed my men, I'll sleep like a baby. Fair enough, Toki thought. You're right. It's probably just as safe as anywhere else. No one's going to approach it. At least not until tomorrow. If we're gone by first light, we should be safe. Coral nodded. Right. Gather the supplies now and have the horses as near to ready as possible. You and I depart at dawn. Right, Toki said, rummaging through the camp while Coral arranged their beds. It's cold, so the 2 of us can share a sleeping bag. Toki's face felt so hot, she may as well have fallen into the fire. Okay, good idea, she said, somehow managing not to stutter. For now, she'd have to keep her true feelings to herself. She wondered if she'd ever have the chance to say what was in her heart. As long as Coral was alive and by her side, that would be enough. The least she could do was help her complete the mission she'd given herself, taking out Hardin's commanders. 1 down, 3 to go. Then Hardin himself. That's the end of chapter 4. Sonny. I'm doing well, Thanos. How are you doing? Sonny, do not step on the book. Oh my goodness. You just need to be groomed. Really bad. I think you just come in here so you could, like, blow hair everywhere. Especially with the fan on. Does your ear itch? His ear itches. He loves getting his ears scratched. Alright. Continuing on. Chapter 5. Reaching the village at the base of Tusk Mountain took much less time and effort than their last destination. If they'd had to continue traveling on foot, they almost certainly wouldn't have made it in time before these cautious archers caught on to trouble and made for a new hiding place. A hiding place they'd be very unlikely to ever find. A decent night's sleep and a ride on the back of a horse gave Toki and Coral much-needed rest. Coral was correct that no one would be brave enough to scavenge through a camp that smelled of fresh blood, with fires still burning. This village was much friendlier than the last, though Toki had to suffer suspicious glances from the locals. Still, gold was gold, and authority was authority. Coral had both. The stable master was happy to keep their horses at the right price. The villagers even had more specific information about the location and layout of the enemy encampment, as some of them had hunted or gathered herbs in the area. Hardin's men had done these people no harm. Not even a warning shot was fired. The closest thing the hostility reported was being followed from a distance and observed until they left the area. Cautious indeed, and likely under those exact orders. Orders Coral and Toki hoped to find. Hardin's men were gathering, but for now they were still split apart. Approaching the camp proved tricky, but with the right help of some of the local hunters, Coral and Toki were guided to a deer path they were told would take them to a ridge just across and behind the camp. It took about an hour, but they could climb through the rocky mountainside, and true to the hunter's word, their first actual view of the camp. A team of 2 archers stood in many areas overlooking the camp below. They had rope with them, but this much rope was heavy and made it problematic to be stealthy. How are we supposed to get any closer than this? Toki whispered, after suffering through as much of the long silence as she could. Coral ignored her, rubbing her chin at the frustration clearing her wrinkled brow and clenched jaw. More silence followed, and Toki joined her in the pondering. No matter how many times they looked at the various openings, they simply couldn't find a way through. Each team was covered by another team, who would immediately notice if they were attacked and alert the others. The front entrance was the most fortified, but with so many trained archers guarding the makeshift gate, it would take a fool. Coral waved Toki to follow her back over the ridge, out of sight of the camp. I just don't see it, Toki. I can't find a weakness. This isn't a makeshift camp in an unfamiliar area that they stumbled on last night. They've had time to scout the immediate surroundings. If you have any ideas, now's the time, she said. Toki only knew of one. A distraction. That's the only way in. Won't work. They're not going to fall for anything short of a full unit lining the hill across from their entrance. The 2 sat quietly again before Toki reluctantly spoke up. And what if there is a unit lining the hill, torches lit and preparing a charge? They'd have no choice but to put all eyes on them and prepare to defend the gate, especially from above, right? Coral nodded but wasn't convinced. If only we had such a thing, Toki. Even if one of us does the distracting, that leaves only one of us to enter and escape the camp. What if the villagers agreed to help? Coral shook her head. We can't ask them to do such a thing. Most would find it acceptable to make the request, but it's not something I can stomach. If these archers decide to march out and pepper them with arrows, that blood will be on our hands. Toki looked at the rope she was carrying and grinned. Head back to the village and gather as many torches as you can find and a longer, thinner rope, the thinnest they can offer, and the more flammable the better. Soak your rope in oil and go up to the hill. Under a cover of darkness, stab the torches into the ground, just on the other side. Bind the top of your rope to each torch and light the end. Then stretch the rope itself will burn away quickly. Once it looks convincing, you can ride along the top of the hill and give a loud speech to your foe unit. Draw it out. I'll make that opportunity to rappel down and assassinate the commander as he prepares, and find any useful documents in the tent. Once I scale back up, I'll drop the rope down so they can't follow me. I'll fire a flaming arrow into the sky so you'll know to abandon the ruse and escape. Coral frowned. Toki had hoped she'd been thoroughly impressed with this plan and how quickly she'd come up with it. You'll be in a lot of danger, Toki. More than me. Let me sneak into the camp, and you take care of the distraction. It's your plane anyway, so you'll do a better job. Toki shook her head. I'm smaller and lighter, and you know I'm the better climber between us. I have all the skills you taught me, so I'll be just fine. Coral took a step forward, putting her hands on Toki's shoulders. For a moment, it looked like she might cry. If something were to happen to you, I wouldn't have anything left. If you do this, you aren't allowed to die. That's an order. Can you promise me you'll follow it? I need to hear you say it. Toki blushed, fighting the urge to take a step back and escape the source of the discomfort. I couldn't live without you either. Okay, I promise. I'll make it out, no matter what. Coral pulled her forward, wrapping her arms around her and saying nothing. She then began the long hike off the mountain. She'd need to make good time to reach the village and return by nightfall. I'll meet you at the bottom of the trail in the morning. Stay hidden until then, Coral said. Now alone, Toki removed the sword from her hip and sat on the ground, holding it in her lap. She meditated, preparing her mind for the battle ahead, just as she'd been taught to do many years ago. Toki had harnessed even more rest at nightfall. Toki had harnessed even more rest as nightfall finally approached. As the darkness gave her cover, she stood on the ridge and awaited her signal. Her only opening was a spot near where she stood. Even though it was in plain sight of 4 of the guards on the cliffs overlooking the camp, it was far enough away that she could, if she was extremely quiet, move without them hearing. She'd simply have to hope they didn't look, or she'd be done for. There would be no defending herself hanging from a rope. Just as I'd planned, a spark of light emerged in the distance and spread quickly in a line. Quickly enough that it was hard to notice the line falling away and leaving the torches lit in an uneven row. Coral rode atop her horse, her sword in the air, shouting orders as she'd done so many times before. She certainly sounded convincing. Her first order was for them to remain out of the archer's line of sight until she gave the order to charge. As expected, all eyes were on the torches and the woman riding in front of them. Toki moved quickly, anchoring her rope to a boulder on the cliff and tying it off in a sturdy knot. She knotted the rope at intervals earlier to make the climb up much quicker and was glad she did. She'd need all the speed she could muster to get out of this alive. Thankfully, she could use some of her skills that she didn't want Coral to see. After a moment, she'd reached the bottom and began sneaking around behind the tent. Almost no one was still here, and it made it easier for her to maneuver with stealth. She eyed the tent for a moment and waited for the 2 men to leave, leaving only one behind. Too easy. Waiting until the man's back was turned, she cut carefully with her knife and slipped inside. This was certainly the commander they'd been looking for. Too easy. Toki drew her sword. Coral rode along the ridge impatiently. She kept her voice even and kept the words flowing from her lips, imagining the faces of the owl company behind each torch. Despite the reopening of the fresh wound in her heart, it kept the performance genuine. How she'd wish they could be with her now. She eyed the cliff. It had been several minutes and still no fire arrow. Had something gone wrong? Had they caught her? No, something might have happened, but she hadn't been caught. There'd be some sign at the front of the gate. She'd see the whispering of a messenger. Something. Then the gate swung open, and what happened next surprised her. Archers poured from the gates. 12 of them, all on horseback, spreading in 2 lines to surround her. She could retreat, but then they'd approach the torches and realize this was a distraction. They'd immediately look for an intruder. They'd find Toki, and she'd be killed. There was no way she'd allow that. Even if it cost her her life, she'd never let Toki be hurt. Even the thought of the possibility made her feel as though her still-beating heart was being ripped from her chest. So be it. Her longbow was not the best one for the job, but she could make up for it with skill and power. Her bow could fire much farther than their short ones. She spurred her horse forward, intercepting one line from a distance. She let loose one of her arrows, and the man riding in the front fell dead. They struggled to see her in the dark. The man behind him sent an arrow toward her, but it fell many strides short. Good. Now she could judge their range accurately. They walked into a trap she'd not intended to set. She'd kill many before they knew what hit them, and Toki would be safe. Turning quickly on her saddle, she fired the other line and killed one man. Both lines faltered. Even for a longbow, Coral's bow was especially high in quality, and even though she was no doubt weaker than many of these larger men, her technique was flawless. Turning back to the closer line, she fired rapidly. 5 shots, and only one remained atop his horse. He too was dead, and hadn't fallen. He was caught in his saddle and slumped forward. The other line halted in their tracks, not sure what to say about the woman in front of them. Save your arrows, men. Don't waste them on these novices. We'll charge the gate after I've killed them myself and sent a message. They'd stopped short of being able to see over the hill, and the rider held up his hand. Retreat for now, he said, keeping his eye fixed on Coral's bow. As the men turned, Coral let loose several more arrows, dropping forward the 6 men fleeing back to the wall. The last one was a trick shot, arched high into the air and predicting the rider's path, prompting gasps from everyone atop the wall who had been watching. She'd only be underestimated once. Next time they came out, it would be with the seriousness to be expected from an elite unit. Crossbowmen would overwhelm her, she was sure of it. Come on, Toki, she thought desperately. As if responding to her thoughts, a flaming arrow flew high into the sky over the camp. She'd done it! As the gate swung open again, Coral pivoted and rode hard before they even saw the direction she'd gone. The relief she felt overwhelmed her. Alone, she allowed herself to shed tears as she rode through the darkness. She couldn't wait to see Toki again. End of chapter 5. I don't remember how many chapters there are in this book. We're on chapter 6 now. We're gonna keep on going. Coral met up with Toki at daybreak, unable to bring herself to wait any longer. Usually 15, okay. The two rushed toward one another, embracing. You did it, Toki. Are you hurt? Let me see where you're hurt, Coral said, pushing her away, leaning from side to side, examining her. You had it worse than me, you know. You should have run away when they charged out like that. Don't worry, I'm not hurt. Coral clutched Toki's shoulders and shook her. What are you saying? You're covered in blood. Undress and let me check. Toki froze in place, blushing furiously again. No, that's okay. Really, I already checked. None of it's mine. Coral tilted her head, eyeing the sword on her hip. Did you draw it? Toki raised her hands. Oh no, you know I couldn't do that. My sword's just for show, same as always. I had to stab him in the neck with my knife. Unfortunately, he bled all over me before he went down. I didn't do a good job with the killing part. Sorry. Coral didn't appear convinced, but knew the sword was a sensitive subject for Toki and didn't force it further. There was a splattering of blood all over Toki's armor that looked like it came from multiple directions. Don't apologize. You succeeded. I made mistakes too, but we survived. That's all that matters. As long as I have you, I can go on, Coral said, patting Toki's head. I couldn't live without you either, because I love you, Coral, Toki had wanted to say. Instead, she decided that expressing those feelings would have to wait until another day. I feel the same way. Oh, and look, I snatched up a prize. Coral smiled. Oh, a letter? 2 letters, Toki corrected, holding up 2 fingers, then reaching into her pouch, pulling them out and handing them to Coral. These are from Hardin, Coral said, unable to disguise her shock. He mentioned his swordsmen will guard the main entrance to the mountain summit until they can meet him there. Hardin himself is waiting at the summit now. He also said that he's aware of a nuisance who took out his cavalry and was sending someone to hunt down this nuisance and deal with them. He must mean us, Toki said. Coral nodded. I suppose we couldn't escape his notice forever. However, we just need to be careful a bit longer. Hardin's head is too valuable to pass up. We need to travel to this other camp and see if there's a way by them undetected. The commander of his swordsmen will have to wait until we're making our way down the mountain after dealing with Hardin. Hardin will be there with his necromancer and by whatever abominations they had the chance to create by now. Someone from the archers' camp probably already sent word to the other camps. We should be careful approaching and watch them for a while, Toki said, shrinking a little. If that's all right with you, I mean. You're the commander. Coral smiled and patted Toki's head again. Why do you act like that, Toki? All timid. Sorry. Still doing it, Coral said, smiling. Oh, I mean, I will try not to. I just don't want you to feel like I'm trying to boss you around. You're the commander, after all. Coral patted her head even harder. Nearly a slap now. You're my friend, Toki. There's no more owl company, so I'm not a commander of anything. It's a technical formality until the king had a proper chance to strip my title from me in disgrace. We're nothing more than vigilantes now, and I'm lucky to have you. Why do you act like that? Toki asked. Like what? Coral asked with her eyes wide. I'm just a slave. Everyone here wishes I would drop dead, no matter how hard I fight for them. I don't belong here, and just because you have trouble with... Coral's hands held both sides of Toki's face. Toki stopped talking, surprised. She was even more shocked to see Coral's eyes damp when she looked up, fighting back tears. I have never thought of you as my slave. Have I ever referred to you as one, even once? Every time you refer to yourself that way, it's like you're burying your dagger in my heart. I gave those slavers money, not so I can own you, but so no one could ever own you so long as I draw breath. I disobeyed the rules and promoted you to my lieutenant, infuriating the other commanders, but I stood my ground and the king allowed my decision. From the day we met, you have been free. Toki felt ashamed, taking a step back and bowing briefly before standing tall to face her. I know, sometimes I just let it get to me. If you don't see me as inferior, then that's good enough for me. I'll try not to worry about what others think. In time, it will be everyone who respects you as much as I do. Once everyone hears what you've done for this kingdom, that alone will change many minds. Speaking of which, we're not done tallying up your exploits. Shall we go? Toki nodded. Let's go. It took them much longer than traveling on the road, but they stuck to the edge of the woods to remain undetected by anyone passing by, and so they could absorb the camp without being noticed when they arrived. They expected to see men diligently patrolling around the entrance, but found no one. They observed for nearly an hour before considering what might be wrong. This is strange. Why hasn't anyone come out? I can see their camp set up just beyond the gate, Toki said. It's not just that. There doesn't appear to be anyone there. At least not that we can see here. A trap? Coral asked, rubbing her chin. No, a lot needs to be done inside a camp like that. They couldn't all just sit still and lie in wait, expecting for someone to come and keep that up all day. I'm confident that they couldn't have seen us approach. Even if they had, we would have seen some sort of sign of them moving into position. There's nothing. Coral sighed. The remaining archers likely headed straight there and warned the swordsmen. They've probably marched up the mountain already to combine their forces. It's possible Hardin's mystery unit could be an individual and the one sent to take care of us. If that individual is hiding in the camp, they're likely to be just as difficult to dispatch as Hardin himself. They can even be his necromancer. Even if it's a trap, it would be better to deal with this warrior alone before they give up finding us and join Hardin as well. Toki couldn't articulate a reason to disagree, but something about this made her feel uneasy. Why send an individual after an attacker or partially attacking a unit of unknown size? He's essentially having this person do what we're doing. Assassination. Aren't necromancers more hands-off and ill-suited for such a thing? Coral shrugged. Perhaps their golem is well-suited for assassination or tracking. We're dealing with a complete mystery. As much as we learned about Hardin's units, their movements, and their plans, we still know nothing about his true plans and most powerful weapons. Those he will keep close, revealing them only when absolutely necessary and when the timing is perfect. Toki swallowed hard. All right, I'm ready. Following your lead. The two of them carefully emerged from the woods, leaving their horses tied out of sight. As they neared the gate, they kept their eyes peeled for archers popping up over the wall to shower them in arrows. That never happened. Even as they entered the gate, knowing dozens of swordsmen could close the distance of their bows in an instant could charge them, they divided their attention in all directions. Attacks could come at any time and from anywhere. No attack came. Once inside, they found signs of a struggle, but no bodies. Toki spotted blood on the ground, meaning this battle was recent. They were ambushed while letting in the archers, I'll bet. Their attackers infiltrated, probably using their uniform, and in the chaos, didn't get noticed. They ambushed them, but were killed. Or forced to flee, Toki said. Or forced to flee, Coral agreed. They could collect the bodies and leave, which is no simple thing to do in the middle of being attacked. Coral's sharp eyes noticed something else in the distance. Through this gate, several wooden areas branched out along the path up the mountain. Not large enough to build a town, but plenty to hide a few men. A horse was tied to a tree some distance away, and she squinted, making out that this was the insignia of an enemy officer. Either it escaped from camp, or someone was watching this camp. Do you see something? Toki asked. No, I thought I saw something, but I'm being paranoid, Coral lied. Let's go back to our little hiding spot in the woods and wait. We may have gotten here ahead of the remaining archers, and we don't want to get sandwiched between them and those who have gone further ahead. We'd better give them time to show up and move on before we advance. It will be bad enough when they join, but it would be worse being trapped between them. Toki nodded, not sure why Coral was lying to her. Coral was a terrible liar, after all, but only because she never practiced. Why now? The two did a quick sweep of the tents, finding nothing. They returned empty-handed to the edge of the woods, where they'd left their horses behind, and set up camp. Sleep well. Tomorrow we may finish this, or accept we've done all we can, Coral said, to Toki's great relief. Okay, sleep well, she replied, hoping she didn't carry that relief in her tone. In a short time, Toki had fallen asleep. Coral sat up, no longer needing to pretend to be asleep herself. She watched Toki for a long time, thinking she could spend the rest of the night doing just that. If only she didn't have somewhere she needed to go, alone. Toki was too timid to draw her sword and avoided killing men up close unless it was absolutely necessary. She couldn't bring her along, even though she knew she would insist on coming. She would move in quietly and take care of this individual hiding in the woods under the cover of darkness. They'd never know what hit them. She could finish them and return by the time Toki stirred in the morning. Coral silently readied her bow and checked her equipment, making her way back inside the camp and beyond. The end of chapter 6. Hello, Foxy! Hello, good. The internet didn't completely drop. That's good. Okay. Hopefully it'd be nice if while I'm taking my break, the ads happen, and then I could come back and continue reading without like another ad break for a while. I don't think I've had one for a while, but I don't like to read during them, because then you might miss something important. It froze for about 15 seconds or so. I didn't notice. I've been trying to keep an eye on like the upload speed and everything to see if it like drops. And it looks like it didn't drop enough to actually break up the stream again. super annoying that that happened. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and take a short break, and I will be back within the next 10 minutes. And I'm going to go get more water. Are you, or a dragon you know, suffering from an understocked gold hoard? On April 5th, 1933, President Roosevelt ordered all gold over a small value be turned in exchange for smelly, dirty, paper human money. On June 5th, 1933, the United States officially went off the gold standard. Do you know what happens when a dragon's breath touches paper money? Dragons have had to resort to desperate measures, assuming human-like forms, depositing this paper money into human banks, and working jobs. Gone are the days you could burn down a castle and take its treasure. Many dragons are working on rebuilding their stocks of gold, but the exchange rate from feeble green paper to beautiful golden metal is very challenging. Please consider supporting Dragon streamers with a donation, Twitch subscription, or art commission. Your donations will go toward gold bars and coins, which will eventually allow your dragon to sleep on a bed of gold again. It's the only way for a dragon to get a proper rest. Please call the 1-800 number below on your screen to make a donation today. Thank you for your kindness, generosity, and compassion. Are you, or a dragon you know, suffering from an understocked gold hoard? On April 5th, 1933, President Roosevelt ordered all gold over a small value be turned in exchange for smelly, dirty, paper human money. On June 5th, 1933, the United States officially went off the gold standard. Do you know what happens when a dragon's breath touches paper money? Dragons have had to resort to desperate measures, assuming human-like forms, depositing this paper money into human banks, and working jobs. Gone are the days you could burn down a castle and take its treasure. Many dragons are working on rebuilding their stocks of gold, but the exchange rate from feeble green paper to beautiful golden metal is very challenging. Please consider supporting Dragon streamers with a donation, Twitch subscription, or art commission. Your donations will go toward gold bars and coins, which will eventually allow your dragon to sleep on a bed of gold again. It's the only way for a dragon to get a proper rest. Please call the 1-800 number below on your screen to make a donation today. Thank you for your kindness, generosity, and compassion. Are you, or a dragon you know, suffering from an understocked gold hoard? On April 5th, 1933, President Roosevelt ordered all gold over a small value be turned in exchange for smelly, dirty, paper human money. On June 5th, 1933, the United States officially went off the gold standard. Do you know what happens when a dragon's breath touches paper money? Dragons have had to resort to desperate measures, assuming human-like forms, depositing this paper money into human banks, and working jobs. Gone are the days you could burn down a castle and take its treasure. Many dragons are working on rebuilding their stocks of gold, but the exchange rate from feeble green paper to beautiful golden metal is very challenging. Please consider supporting dragon streamers with a donation, Twitch subscription, or art commission. Your donations will go toward gold bars and coins, which will eventually allow your dragon to sleep on a bed of gold again. It's the only way for a dragon to get a proper rest. Please call the 1-800 number below on your screen to make a donation today. Thank you for your kindness, generosity, and compassion. Are you, or a dragon you know, suffering from an understocked gold hoard? On April 5th, 1933, President Roosevelt ordered all gold over a small value be turned in and exchanged for smelly, dirty paper human money. On June 5th, 1933, the United States officially went off the gold standard. Do you know what happens when a dragon's breath touches paper money? Dragons have had to resort to desperate measures, assuming human-like forms, I'm back. I gotta catch up with chat. Lurking, but I will try to check chat. Yeah. Y'all are lurk masters. I think everybody in here is a lurk master. Usually, I've got a lot of lurkers. And like a lot of tabs. I only have one window open. I currently think I don't know how many tabs I have open. This computer I don't use very often. I only use it for streaming, and so I try to keep it down low so I could find things like guides and my art references, but I have one. About 20, a little over 20, just on this. And I'm never in here. Like, I'm in here for like 3 hours, 4 times a week. I probably actually only have like 30 on my other screen, on my other computer, but only because I try to keep relevant things open. You gotta support the Dragon Mommy, but I do other stuff that takes audio. I should put that no audio tag on my name, I guess. Yeah. Oh, there you go. Better. Oh, no, Mr. Bogat doesn't like that you don't have audio. Because I can't call you out then. Alright, anyway. What chapter are we on? I got water. I'm ready to go. Oh, we're halfway through the book. Chapter 7. As Coral stepped into the abandoned campsite, she listened carefully for the crackling of a fire. Not only did she not hear it, but she heard nothing. Making camp without a fire was dangerous. Under normal circumstances, Coral would assume she was dealing with a fool. However, these were not normal circumstances. Under those circumstances, it seemed like a worthy gamble to make. Gamble. Wow, that was like a huge whisper. Without a fire, an archer could not ambush him easily. With no noise, he had the advantage. He could simply wait. Still, she needed to finish this. This was indeed the necromancer. It may very well be the last battle she ever fought. Even though she wanted nothing more than to have Toki by her side right now, she couldn't indulge that desire if it meant their death. Ideally, that wouldn't happen. Coral certainly would not allow it to happen easily. She crept slowly, unable to be completely silent, but close enough that only the most perceptive ears could sense her coming. As she neared the camp, she could see movement near a fallen log, and the horse from earlier was still there, bearing a Moiran commander's insignia. He was here, and he was a cautious man. Coral eyed a cluster of trees and climbed one of them. She took her time, mindful to only move up with the breeze masking her sound and the slight movement of the heavy branches. Once near the top and stable, she took the time to observe her enemy. The man appeared to pay her no notice. It seemed he had not been as smart as she thought because he piled his firewood. He was lighting the fire. Should she take him out now? No, something told her to watch more carefully. He'd positioned himself so he was almost entirely obscured by a tree between them. Coral leaned so she could have a better look at him. Just in case he escaped, she wanted to have a good look. He was a tall, muscular man. It wasn't easy to make out his finer features, but Coral noticed his full beard. He didn't look like she'd imagined a necromancer looking, a slight, scholarly frame ill-suited to the sword. However, this man looked as though he was born to swing one. Although she learned not to make assumptions, she'd wager to the man's bulky frame would make it difficult for him to close the distance and fight her in this dim and dense forest. She could take him wherever she wanted now. If only he'd move back to where she was originally sitting, so she could have a clear shot. She also wanted him to remove the hood that was obscuring most of his face, so she could have a better look at him. If he fled now, his large frame and beard might not be enough to identify him quickly should he escape. The breeze picked up suddenly and gave her the opportunity she needed. She stepped onto the branch of the closest tree, with branches conveniently overlapping. However, no sooner than she'd done so, the man moved again. What was this? A coincidence? Coral froze in place, waiting for a reaction or any sign that he was onto her. Then, without warning, he walked away, toward her. Coral froze and sucked in a deep breath quietly, letting out as slowly as she could. She could hear him walking on the leaves below. He couldn't move as quietly as she could. He wasn't sneaking, nor was he running away. Coral waited until the steps stopped. She could sense where he would stand based on his last step and knowing the size of his body. This was a skill she had honed to perfection and never failed to catch someone off their guard. She could strike his torso and cripple something vital. Bleeding would make him easy to track, even if he ran, and he'd be making plenty of noise. He'd be easy to finish then. She knocked an arrow and drew back slowly. Holding on to her breath, she fired. She heard the man's grunt and leaves being scattered about. She'd hit him, but possibly didn't kill him. She had to go down to be sure. She wasted no time in scaling down the tree and running toward her target, though experience had taught her never to get too excited and to keep her heart beating slowly. When she neared the area, she walked quietly again. The problem was, she could barely see. He'd walk away just as clouds had covered the moonlight. She'd have to wait them out. She could almost make out a figure lying on the ground, but in her excitement, she could have been mistaken. Eventually, the clouds cleared and the moonlight pierced through the trees. He wasn't there. Her arrow had hit a tree. How was this possible? He must have used the stick to make the sounds of the final steps. Well, it seems I've gotten you out of your little roost. Come on out. Share the fire with me and we'll exchange stories and food. A skilled assassin like you surely has many to tell, the man said calmly. He was hidden by a large tree now. Coral wouldn't fall for the nice guy trick. Not a chance. She shifted between the trees for cover, attempting to maneuver around him. There was no point in being quiet now. She'd use the speed to corner him. No man could move through the forest of Velmar the way Coral could. It was a setback, but one that would be short-lived. He attempted to move away from her, but failed to match her speed in the darkness. Just as she was about to prepare her shot against running prey, he suddenly turned and rushed toward her even faster than he'd been running away. The sword in his hand was unwieldy. So long as she could stay in the thick brush, he'd never be able to swing it accurately. As he swung, Coral leaned back to dodge gracefully, but the tip of the blade nicked her neck. Through all the brush, he'd swung cleanly, and with speed far beyond anything she could have imagined. She'd intended to dodge far enough away to mount a counter with her own blade, but found herself only narrowly keeping her head. Worse, she was now in the retreat. For an ordinary archer, losing the pressure of an attack meant death. However, Coral was not ordinary. Nothing matched her skill with the bow, but she held her own against her unit's top swordsman. She drew her blade, still gripping her bow tightly in her left hand, thrusting forward. He was off balance now from the powerful swing of that bulky sword. With cat-like movement, the man leaned beneath the strike, in a movement that felt both slow and fast at the same time. With a step forward, he landed a kick to Coral's chest, sending her sailing through the air. Who was this man? He was certainly no necromancer. A necromancer's golem? The glow of the moon had returned fully, giving Coral much-needed visibility. She needed to get out of this man's reach if she had any hope of winning the fight. Before she'd even landed, she'd scouted another tree so she could scale again quickly and sprinted for it after scrambling to her feet again. Trees again, the man shouted, running after her, but failing to catch her in time. Now she had him. From the safety of a high branch, Coral readied another arrow and fired it before he could reach cover. For a man his size, his speed was beyond just impressive. It made the theory that he wasn't human seem more credible. He swatted the arrow before it hit him, taking a nasty gash on his left arm, making it behind cover before the next one fired. He was stuck. If he left cover, she would fire immediately. Despite this, he surprised Coral yet again by abandoning this cover and throwing something toward her. A large knife. It missed her and sunk into the branch she was standing on next to the tree. Seems the man was only skilled with a sword and at close range. This was desperation, and he lost his chance. Coral fired another arrow, but the knife's impact had disrupted her aim just enough to disturb the trajectory. It sank into the man's shoulder instead of his heart. He could make it to another tree. Coral cursed under her breath. Tell me, where is Moira's last necromancer? I don't have time to play with you anymore. Then something else unexpected happened. The man's voice softened again. Buried in her garden. I dug the grave myself. That couldn't be right. Then tell me why you're collecting corpses and bringing up the mountain. What? The man asked, panicked. Had he really not known? Just who exactly was this man? A trick. Had to be. The branch beneath Coral's feet suddenly gave way. Had he managed to somehow throw that knife hard enough to damage the branch, enough to break it? Was that his plan all along? As she fell, she hit her head on a branch below, and her limp body slammed against more as she continued to fall. The last thing she saw was the man leaping up from behind the tree and sprinting toward where she would land, but not with his sword out. He spread his arms wide. Did he actually intend to save her from the fall? He tackled her, falling as he did, putting himself between her and the ground. It wasn't a great height, but she'd suffer serious injuries had he not done so. She did not know what would happen next, or what this man had planned for her. Her only thoughts were of Toki. Her vision went dark. She'd lost. It was over. End of chapter 7. It's getting intense, yeah? Intense. Again, the story is A Kiss of You and of Iron and You. I keep wanting to say it backwards. And that's by Mr. Bogath. A nasty, rabid raccoon who apparently just uses his rabidness to write good stories. So if you want to check it out, the link is in the pinned comment, and it keeps unpinning itself because either the internet goes out or Mr. Bogath, forgets to put it on a manual or into the stream ends. He is crazy about writing stories. It's true. He's got a lot of books. If you look at the Amazon listing and go and look at his author profile, he's written too many books. Like those old used car commercials. Crazy about writing. Yes. All right, chapter 8. Toki woke up while the sky was still dark, and her heart sank to see that Coral was gone. Coral was one of the few people capable of moving quietly enough for her not to notice, but she cursed herself for not better using her training. Nothing could have escaped her notice, but now the most important person to her in the world had done just that. She quickly lit a lantern and checked around the camp looking for a note. Coral would have surely left her one. Toki could find nothing, and sighed. Now she'd gone from afraid to hurt. Coral must have seen something earlier, after all, something dangerous. It must have been the assassin closing in. Toki grasped her sword, resting tightly in the scabbard. She stared at it for a moment as though the two could speak silently to one another, then made her way toward the camp. It didn't take her long. No matter how badly Coral didn't want to be tracked, Toki tracked just about anyone. She moved slowly and deliberately through the darkness. If she wasn't careful, she could interrupt Coral's plans and put her in even greater danger. She knew Coral was superior at moving through the night and killing enemies with her arrows before anyone could notice. Normally, she could be confident Coral would be perfectly fine and back by morning, but several things bothered her. She remembered the wounds on the men they'd encountered. Something about them was so powerful and precise that it made her afraid. Not for herself, but what it would mean if the two of them were to encounter such a warrior. More than that, she'd hoped this warrior would be a friend. If Coral attacked him before realizing that, a man this skilled might actually kill her. She felt so guilty, knowing she'd hidden her knowledge of the wounds because she didn't want Coral to ask her questions about why she knew the things she did. Now, she wished that she'd just told her. If the man was a foe, things would not be easy for her. Toki crept through the camp, stopping every so often to listen. Once in a while, she'd hear a noise, but it was quiet enough that she wondered if it was her imagination. Finally, a loud crash echoed through the previously silent night. This close, it may as well have been a cannon. She hurried, but wasn't able to run. The floor of the forest was full of hazards. Rocks, fallen branches, or dangerous animals in the wrong place at the wrong time. She covered the distance, only tripping twice. Just after the crack, she could almost swear she heard Coral scream mixed with the sound. Her heartbeat quickened, and she found it hard to breathe. At last, she'd made it into a much less dense part of the forest, where the sound was coming from. She was certain now that she could see a large figure down on the ground, crouching. The clouds had cleared, and the moonlight was glowing. As she creeped closer, she saw the man crouched over something. No, not something. Someone. Coral was lying there, and her face was bloody. She wasn't moving. In an instant, Toki drew her sword and attacked without hesitation. The swing whistled through the air, the strike so strong and quick that the steel of her sword sang as it traveled. The stranger was far quicker than a normal man, dodging almost on instinct, narrowly avoiding a killing blow and rolling aside. She might have been able to follow up with a fatal strike before she could stand, but if Coral really was dead, she would make this man's death slow. He would suffer for taking her away. Toki kneeled, trembling, and cradled Coral's head in the bend of her arm. Coral! Coral, I'm here! But Coral didn't answer. The only part of her that moved was the blood, still flowing down her cheek and dripping onto Toki's lap in the dim moonlight. Toki's tears fell along with them as the man cautiously stood to his feet. He sheathed his sword and held up his hands. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to happen this way. I'm not your enemy. You're the one responsible for killing half the men in that camp with hardened archers. The way you swung your sword just now, I've never seen anything like it. Please, we don't need to fight, he said, pleading with Toki. I'm not your enemy, he repeated. Perhaps, Toki thought, he wanted to avoid this fight for the same reason she had. How much she wanted to avoid it. How much she wanted Coral to never know the truth about her. Now, she never would. Now, it didn't matter. If she no longer had Coral, she no longer had a reason to stay her hand. None of it mattered anymore. Nothing mattered anymore. You are now, Toki said, gently lowering Coral back to the ground. She couldn't bear to look at her now. She stood and faced the man, bringing her sword in front of her. That stance. It's not Valmari, the man said, drawing his own sword with a sigh, accepting that this was not a fight he could avoid now. Yours isn't Moirin. What's your name? It's the custom of those from my homeland to exchange new names with those they are about to duel. I'm Toki Takahashi, daughter of Kikai Takahashi. Tell me the name of the man I'm about to kill. Blaingrave, and my father's name is a mystery even to me. No doubt you've heard of me. For once I hope my reputation gives you pause before insisting on this duel. I don't want to fight you. She'd thought so. Blaingrave. Stories about the man varied from being heartless butcher to a compassionate man who helped those he encountered in his travels. One thing was consistent. The man was a living legend as a swordsman by now. There were tales he'd killed the last necromancer in Moira. And Arthurus, he fought and won over 100 duels. Now he was here, for who knows what reason. Toki took two steps forward, bringing her sword down in a practice strike she'd done tens of thousands of times. Blaine's swordsmanship impressed Toki. He'd not made the mistake of attempting to dodge the strike. That would have been fatal. Instead, in a choice that should have seemed illogical, he parried the strike, allowing Toki to slash into his upper arm, rather than kill him. She leaped back, relaxing her stance. Why did you choose the parry, rather than dodge? Toki asked. Now that Coral was gone, her demeanor quickly reverted to how it had been before she'd arrived on the shores of Velmar. Cold, with a complete confidence in her victory, as that the gods had written it into fate itself. She would have to go back to thinking only about the sword. Things would be different from now on. If you're calm enough to ask, then let's put down our blades and cool our heads. Just answer the question, Toki said, tightening her stance once again. I don't know why. Mostly I feel my way through battles and trust my gut. Now that I've answered, if this is a true duel, I forfeit. Please accept your victory and we can talk about everything. Besides, we're not even sure. Toki shook her head, letting her emotions get the better of her. A recent problem that came with her feelings for Coral. She never had shown emotion like this before. Certainly not in front of an enemy. Will that bring Coral back? I want Coral back. Nothing is good enough. Kill yourself with your own sword if you don't like mine. That's the only choice I'll give. Blaine squeezed the hilt of his sword, holding it in front of him. I'm sorry, I can't do that. It's you or me, and I don't think you realize who your opponent is. Based on your movement and that exotic name, you're one of the 12 princes from across the ocean, right? Or one of them trained you. I read that 5 of them fought off an advancing naval force of 500 invaders, killing each one nearly the moment he stepped off the boat. That last ship and his crew were spared so they could return home and tell the story. I always thought they made it up. That the men were threatened to tell such an outlandish story in exchange for being spared, and it was actually an army that defeated them. Now that we've crossed blades, I see the story must have been true after all. Girls can't be princes, blamed Grave. Disagreeing with that cost my father his life. Your mistake will cost you yours. Blaine charged forward, swinging his sword in a horizontal slash. The speed surprised Toki. It seemed inhuman coming from a man of his size and strength. Yet, it was still crude, unrefined. This man's natural talent and passion had kept him alive for this long, but he lacked any kind of formal training worthy of his ability. None existed on this continent. She easily bent her body, twisted as she stepped onto the strike, turning the blade as though she was one who had set it in motion. Continuing forward, she propelled her blade into a piercing attack, part of a series of movements she'd practiced for years. Emperor's Wrath variation, Serpent's venomous strike. Blaine reacted quickly, leaning to the side to prevent his artery from being slashed. Toki adapted just as quickly to this change, turning her wrist to compensate, leaving Blaine with no choice but to grab the blade with his hand. She attempted to withdraw it, but couldn't match Blaine's strength. His hand was wounded, but he'd bound her sword. Before Toki could follow up her attack, Blaine lunged toward her, attempting to deliver a knee to her chest. In a swift motion, Toki caught the leg, one arm wrapped behind his calf muscle and the other forearm applying pressure to the knee. She stepped in, blocking Blaine's foot from being able to step back, and applied sudden pressure to his knee. This sent him toppling onto his back. At the same moment, Toki expected the grip on her sword to weaken. He'd surprised her once again, as somehow he stayed focused on it despite falling. He'd let go of his own sword so he can grip hers with both hands. With his weight and the force of falling backward, Toki had no choice but to release her sword or risk falling onto the ground with a man who could overpower her with weight and muscle there. She stood quietly looking at her hand in disbelief. No one's ever disarmed me before. I suppose you're thinking that exchanging weapons gives you the advantage somehow. That you can use my lighter sword easier than I can use your heavier one, she said, hoisting Blaine's sword up with a two-handed grip and resting it on her shoulder. You stand no more chance now than you did before. I never even got to tell Coral that. Hand gripped Toki's ankle, and she nearly spun to cut it off, purely on instinct. It was Coral. She brought up her other hand and gripped Toki's pants, then the other to her belt, using her clothes to pull herself up clumsily to her feet. By the time she got to her feet, Coral gripped her tightly in the collar of her shirt. Coral, you're not... Before Toki could finish the sentence, Coral had pulled her in and pressed her lips tightly against her own. Toki's body tightened at first, still filled with the rage of thinking she was dead. Now she was embarrassed she'd let her emotions take such firm control of her actions that she didn't bother to check Coral's pulse. She missed her slowed breathing in the dimness of the moonlight. This wasn't the woman her father had trained to always be in control of such things. She was glad that she wasn't that person anymore. She never wanted to be that person ever again. Toki's grip on the sword weakened, then gave way, allowing it to fall harmlessly to the ground. She wrapped her arms around Coral's waist and gripped her with all her strength, pressing into the kiss. Damn, just kissing in front of the guy she was just fighting. I mean, can't get any better than that, right? Oh, my nose is running again. Fuck him. Exactly, that's right. So that was chapter 8. Whew, we are on chapter 9. He don't like it, he can leave. I'm sure he's got a lot to talk about. This Blaine Grave, who we've never seen before. Just kidding, he's in every single book. Alright. Chapter 9. Coral rinsed in pain, and Toki immediately released her, only keeping hold of her now to prevent her from falling. That kind of hurt, Coral said, smiling. I love you, Coral, Toki said, crying too hard to say anything else. If I'd known that, I've told you how I felt sooner. Funny, we both kept quiet for the same reason. Coral reached up and touched her head, looking at the blood on her hand. I think my rib's broken, and I took a pretty good blow to the head. But I'd be dead if it wasn't for that man catching me and breaking my fall. Let me help you find a place to sit, and I'll look at your wounds, Toki said, pulling Coral toward a fallen tree nearby. I want more of those first, Coral said, planting her feet firmly and pointing to her lips. Toki sighed, wiping her eyes and smiling. Okay, last one. Toki leaned forward more gently this time, giving her a quick kiss. When they turned to walk around the tree, Blaine was standing in front of them with a needle and thread in his hands. Allow me, I've gotten good at this, he said. Coral nodded, and together, Blaine and Toki, they helped her sit. I'm sorry I attacked you, Coral said, struggling to keep a straight face as Blaine cleaned the wound and began threading the needling along the short slit in her forehead. I took the gamble by tying up the commander's horse near my tent, hoping to lure more of them in. I should have considered the possibility of being attacked by the Vilmari. You're skilled with that bow like no one I've ever seen. It's only natural you ambushed me. I'd have done the same thing, Blaine said, smiling. This man was so accustomed to these types of skirmishes that he'd already returned to a completely calm state, as though it had never happened. Only moments ago, both of them were trying to kill him. He also seemed unaffected by the moment they just stared. He was very open-minded, it seemed. I'm sorry too, Mr. Grave, Toki said, hanging her head. Blaine opened his mouth to respond, but Coral's wide-eyed reaction to hearing the name caused them both to give them her attention. You're kidding! Blaine Grave? Ha! You really get around, Blaine. Do you usually go sightseeing in war zones? Blaine chuckled. I have some business here. With General Hardin? Toki asked. With General Hardin, Blaine confirmed. But why? Arthurus doesn't have any quarrel with Moira. Why would you risk your life to go off to Hardin? Coral paused a moment, remembering what Blaine had said about the necromancer. The necromancer you knew in Moira was a friend? A lover? A friend, Blaine said, lowering his voice. Hardin used her to bolster his armies for his campaign. I'm sorry, Coral said, as Blaine broke the thread, finishing the stitches on her head. Hardin's cavalry killed my entire unit. Only Toki and I survived, but we didn't even get the chance to fight. By the time we got there, it was over. I think it was you we saw then, pursuing them. We thought you were traveling with them. Let's join together. Hardin has a lot to answer for, and it's going to take the three of us to see it done. I doubt Hardin would give me so much trouble as the two of you did. Head back and let me take care of it. Toki shook her head. You don't understand, Mr. Grave. Your friend might not be the last necromancer. There may be at least one other, and they may be here with Hardin. Well, now there's an ad break, so I'm gonna wait for a minute and a half. We're like halfway done with the book. So we got like an hour left. I think we'll probably finish. It'll probably be like 10 or 10:30 by the time we finish this book. It won't let me pause any more breaks. We have to wait. Do 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 do. Ugh. The outdoors is killing my nose. So is the heat. Now, in my area, and then probably across the United States in general, or at least the eastern part of the United States, like, there's like a major, like, large heat index, like high heat index this time of year. Crazy wild. We went hiking today too, and even though we went in the morning, it was really hot. It was a pretty strenuous mountain we climbed up to. A little bit of switchbacks, a little bit of steepness, and then we lost the trail. That was really awful when we lost the trail, and then we just decided, fuck it, we're going down the mountain. So that's what happened. Oh, and hey, look, I have 197 followers. I'm 3 away from having 200 followers. Woohoo! Look at me go. Alright, now we can keep going. I gotta find it. Okay, I'm just gonna start this paragraph over. Toki shook her head. You don't understand, Mr. Grave. Your friend might not be the last necromancer. There may be at least one other, and they may be here with Hardin. They're collecting corpses. I can't think of another reason for that. We have to accept it's a possibility. We intercepted a letter sent by Hardin himself. He has someone he intended to send after us, knowing what we're capable of. We thought that person might be you, but now, that person is also a mystery. Hardin would never stand his ground if he wasn't prepared to defend it. He'd have retreated by now if it wasn't otherwise. Blaine looked at the two of them, silent contemplating their request. Coral reached into her small tool pouch and pulled out a pair of cutters, grabbing the arrow shaft through Blaine's shoulder to stabilize it. With some effort, snipping off the arrowhead through the back and carefully pulling the shaft through the wound. Blaine gave no reaction. There, luckily you missed anything important. I rarely do that, you know. Blaine nodded. I don't doubt that. As for your question... Shh. Toki held her fingers to her lips. The sound of human footsteps quickly grew, almost silent at first. It was a charge. Get ready, she said, drawing her sword. Toki and Blaine stood side by side as Coral found a tree to climb. She no sooner made it than men started appearing in the clearing. Had Toki not warned them, they never stood a chance. The first man was Moirin, without a doubt. However, the other figures that emerged shook the three of them to their core. Coral, most of all. That's Horace, Coral shouted. He's from our company. Blaine stepped forward, cutting him down. He isn't anymore, Coral. Keep it together. Coral steadied herself, taking several deep breaths, struggling to maintain her composure. She'd raised her bow, her hands trembled. Was it because of the blow to her head? Toki made even quicker work of those who approached from her side. Each swing of her sword, like Blaine's, took one person with it. Hers, however, was much quicker. Blaine found himself distracted by the sight more than once. Coral began releasing arrows, one after another. Before one man would hit the ground with the first arrow, another would fly. Another man entered the clearing, and his jaw nearly dropped to the ground, seeing that 20 or more men he'd sent in there mere seconds ago had already been slaughtered. He moved to lunge at Toki, but quickly thought better of it. Coral loosed an arrow that caught the man on the side of his ankle, causing him to stumble. He continued limping, but only made it 3 more steps before another arrow caught his opposite ankle. He could go no further, collapsing to his knees and looking over his shoulder as Toki approached, grabbing him by the collar of his shirt and flinging him onto his back. Don't kill me! I surrender, he shouted. Toki put her sword against his throat. Why were our comrades turned into the undead? Arden's gone mad! Not just your many turned into them, but ours too. A large group was sent to the village nearby. They'll be there soon. Blaine took a step back, put off his balance by the sudden news. But why? They aren't soldiers. Why slaughter innocent people for no reason, he asked. There's a reason. More bodies. A bigger army. Arden thinks if word spreads of this, King Luther will hand Velmar over to him in no time. Blaine grabbed Toki's arms. We have no time to waste. Then he turned to the man. Who is Harden's necromancer? You don't understand. The necromancer isn't who you should be worried about. Harden has a powerful ally who just arrived to support him. He's... A gush of blood from the man's neck cut his words short, but neither Toki nor Blaine had slashed him. A gust of wind flew past them that nearly knocked them to the ground as leaves scattered across the forest floor. Coral, the tree! Blaine shouted, quickly pointing toward a man standing on a branch nearby. Coral didn't hesitate, firing an arrow at the man. Before the first one had even landed, she'd already prepared a second one and sent it following not far behind. With a wave of the man's hand, he sent arrows off the mark, flying harmlessly to his side. Without a word, he leaped backwards from the branch. However, his body never touched the ground. He sailed through the air like a bird and disappeared in seconds. We should go after him, Coral said. There's no time, Blade said. We have to go to the village right now. Coral clenched her fists. That was a mage. We can't let him go. Toki nodded. If he catches us by surprise again, we may be finished. Help me, and I'll help you, Blaine pleaded. I promise to deal with the mage no matter what it takes, but we have to save the village first. Deal, Coral said, scaling down the tree and running to them. We want to save the villagers just as much as you, Blaine. More, but this is a gamble. I hope we're betting on the correct choice. Follow me, Blaine said, running to the warhorse he tied up earlier. When we reach the road, Toki and I can get our own horses tied just inside the woods. It'll make the ride quicker, Coral said. Blaine had already mounted and was pulling Toki up behind him. Toki extended her hand, helping Coral up behind her. Let's ride, Coral shouted. And the end of chapter 9. We got like 6 more chapters. We got chapters 10 through 15. Seems like the internet is staying pretty stable, which is fantastic. Okay, let's keep going. Chapter 10. The situation was becoming more and more dire with each passing day. Every bit of information received carried with it only bad news. At first, it was only a handful of Harden's closest men remaining in Velmar causing problems. Then, our company is butchered. They find there are still necromancers left after all, and those ones appear to be in Belmar. An assassin appears who uses magic. Wind magic, which means he's from Estonia to the west. Having an enemy on your border is bad enough, but being sandwiched between two of them is far, far worse. Wind mages are few, but even a limited attack by one of their airships would be devastating. Hardin needed to be dealt with quickly, and all the more. If they could drive him out, Estonia would quickly lose interest, assuming the Estonian king is even aware. Perhaps this mage was like Blaine, a man with his own purpose for being there. But that only made him more dangerous. Is your head okay? Toki asked as she and Coral rode side by side. Thankfully, it doesn't seem serious. My side's killing me, but I'll be all right. I want to talk with you about the things you said to Blaine after this fight, assuming we're still alive. Coral couldn't finish the sentence. Ahead of them was their first lucky break since all this began. About 100 men, all on foot. Are you seeing this, Coral? Blaine shouted behind him. Once I engage them, you and Toki are to ride ahead and warn the village to prepare. I will harass them on the road until they arrive. I have several good miles to thin their numbers. Toki, give me your arrows. I'm going to need them. But Coral, Toki protested while handing her quiver over. Coral slung it awkwardly over her shoulder next to her own. She then tossed her insignia to Toki, who caught it. She narrowed her eyes at it, then looked at Coral. That's an order, Coral said, readying an arrow. Ride hard. The arrow left her bow and traveled straight through the head of one man, who fell flat to the ground. They ignored them completely, fixated on their task. They were as strong as a living man, but they couldn't think independently like one. Blaine and Toki rushed past them, and the men along the edges of the formation swung their swords in vain as they passed by. So it turned out they would engage when someone entered their range. And it seemed they were all undead this time, just some fresher than others. Coral fired another arrow into them, knocking one down after another. Nearly a dozen of them fell like targets for practice. For a moment, it seemed like this would be too easy. For a moment, she thought she would have most of them killed by the time they reached the town. It was too good to be true. A rider approached them from behind. The man may have been undead, but unlike the others, appeared better equipped. Almost none of his flesh was visible. He wore heavy armor from head to toe, carrying a heavy sword and shield. Oddly, he didn't control the reins of his horse. Rather, it seemed the horse was the one in control. This horse was twice the size of her own horse. Even bigger than something you would expect to see on a farm, but many things about her were strange. Much stranger than its size. Its coat was pitch black, matching its hollow eyes. Despite the gigantic frame, this horse was closing in on her as though she were casually trotting along. Things had gone from bad to worse. She spurred her horse on. Faster, she shouted as she turned in her shadow, firing 3 arrows in rapid succession at the horse's rider. All bounced violently off the rider's breastplate. He'd made no effort to block them with his shield. Sorry, horse, she mumbled to herself, aiming the next arrow at the horse's skull. She let it loose, and it stuck in the horse's forehead. It shrieked, veering to the side and knocking down several of the men running on foot. Coral took down several more of them, relieved that the rider was just now as helpless as they were. Or so she thought. The horse broke through the center of the men, flinging several of them aside. The arrow was still in the horse's head, but didn't seem to slow it down. She cursed under her breath, firing another arrow into the horse's chest. Again it shrieked and fell to the ground. Again she returned her attention to the men charging on foot. She'd taken out nearly 30 of them now, several with the unintentional help of the mysterious rider. It was only a few seconds this time before the horse appeared again. Coral was no longer the hunter. She'd become the prey and didn't even know what her pursuer was. All the other undead felt like normal men with a shot through its vital areas. This horse was invincible. Nothing could harm it, and it was as fast as a racehorse. Faster. The size of a giant farm horse. No, larger. What was this thing? Coral knew she'd be nearing the village soon, and she couldn't let this rider go charging in. It was her priority now. She turned on the road, leading the rider away from the charging unit. Sure enough, he followed. So, he was after her. She stopped in place, needing maximum precision. She couldn't mess this shot up. She sucked in air, readied her bow, and held it there for a time as the rider quickly approached. She aimed carefully. Then she fired. The arrow flew into the rider's helmet through an opening scarcely larger than the arrowhead itself. The rider swayed, then dropped his shield to the ground. He gripped his sword with both hands and readied a powerful swing that was on a clear path to Coral's neck. Just as he started the swing, his grip loosened and his arms sagged. Midway through the swing, the sword slipped from his grasp, landing on the ground in front of Coral's horse. His hands continued the movement as he passed by Coral, mere inches from her throat. Had the sword still been in his hand, she would be headless right now. She'd never been so scared in her life. The rider fell from the horse. Rather than turning and charging her again, the riderless horse continued running in the direction opposite in the village. Coral readied another arrow, not content to leave this horse alive. She fired, but the beast sped up faster than she could predict, and her arrow fell short of the target. She watched her ride away and breathed a sigh of relief before turning and riding toward the village. Toki and Blaine were riding so hard that their horses were nearly collapsed as they reached the gate of the village. "Incoming attack! You have minutes to prepare!" Blaine shouted. Two ill-equipped men came stumbling out of the gate, no doubt reeling from the shock of their life. "Are you trying to rob us, foreigners? You bandits! Get out of here before we give you what for!" the old man shouted, taking a step forward and drawing his sword, pointing it directly at Blaine. "You old fool! There's a warrior marching up this road right now. You have minutes and you're wasting them." Blaine reached down, grabbing the sword from the old man's hand and yanking it so hard he fell face first onto the ground. Blaine threw the sword beside him and looked at the younger man. "How dare you treat my father that way?" the young man said, drawing his own sword. "I hope for your sake you have more sense than your father. Warn the rest of the villagers. We must mount a defense, now!" Several other villagers ran out of the gate now, holding various tools and weapons in their hands, quickly surrounding Toki and Blaine. "Foreigners, trying to trick us with a fake attack so they could rob our stores while we stand here twiddling our thumbs, waiting for imaginary attackers," the young man said. Everyone held up their weapons without question. "Enough!" Toki shouted. "Velmar is my home. I'm Lieutenant Toki Takahashi of Owl Company. Commander Coral Sumari is fighting for your lives at this very moment on the road, just to slow them down and give us valuable time. She gave me this insignia to prove to you that Velmar stands ready to defend its people, but we need your help." Toki held up the insignia, waving it in front of them, causing them to take a step back. The old man scrambled to his feet. "Then you know Jabari, my son. He's a member of the Owl Company. Will he be riding with your commander?" Toki grimaced, slowly shaking her head. "Hardin's men attacked us. Only Coral and I survived. No one else. I'm sorry. I remember Jabari well. He had a scar on his left cheek. He said he got it because he was protecting his brother from you when you were drunk and flung a chisel across the room." The old man dropped to his knees and sobbed. Blaine clenched his teeth and opened his mouth. His patience was clearly wearing thin. Toki looked at him and shook her head. He understood. "How do we know she didn't steal that insignia from the dead commander?" one woman shouted. "Yeah, look at her. She's no more Velmari than the man beside her, and he's no more Velmari than Hardin himself," another man shouted. "Be quiet," the old man said, standing to his feet, wiping away the snot from his nose with a loud sniff. "I'm standing with the lieutenant of Owl Company, even if I have to fight every one of you and the invaders myself." Everyone was silent for a few seconds when a woman tried to speak up again. "But I stand with Owl Company," he repeated, holding his sword in the air. "I stand with Owl Company," his son roared, his own cheeks wet with tears from the news of his brother. Blaine spat. "It's about time. Now give me every young man capable of holding something sharp in his hand out here and holding it in the next 30 seconds. Young women should be armed and ready to hold the line to protect the children and elderly if any break through." Everyone looked at him but did nothing. They all looked at Toki. "On the double!" Toki shouted, drawing her sword and pointing it into the village. All at once, everyone was now sprinting through the gate and into the village, shouting "To arms!" as loud as they could. Blaine smiled at Toki and looked as though he might make a joke. Instead, seeing her troubled expression, he knew exactly what was on her mind. "Coral will be fine," he said. "I know," she replied, dismounting from her horse with an acrobatic leap. "I will make sure of it." That's the end of chapter 10. Wah, wah, wah. Yeah, you need a drink of water. Again, this story is A Kiss of Iron and You. It is pinned. The link to it is pinned in the comment up top. So if you want to check it out, it's by Mr. Bogath. The Rabbit Raccoon, he writes way too many books. Also, if you want to catch Mr. Bogath's stream, he usually streams every weekday morning. Depending on what time he gets up, it could be 8 o'clock, it could be 9 o'clock, it could be 10 o'clock. It also depends on the internet. But luckily, it seems to be holding firm. Alright, we're going to keep going. We are on chapter 11. Only a few men made it out in front of the village in time. A ragtag group of only 24. Some were too young to be called men and too old to be called able, but showed up just the same. A group of similar size crowded the rarely used watchtowers, which were barely tall enough to count as towers. Toki had hoped Coral would not split the command, instructing the archers, but she'd not arrived yet. As the group neared, Toki found her anxiety growing. What could have happened? Still, now wasn't the time to panic. The faster they put down the attack, the sooner she could ride out and find Coral. Coral would be furious with her if she left the villagers with only Blaine to help them. Are you sure we shouldn't have told them the group was a bunch of undead thralls? Blaine asked, looking back over his shoulder, waiting for their reaction. I'm sure of it. There's no magic in Belmar, mostly. People here are terrified of it. Blaine's eyes widened. Isn't that more the reason to tell them? Toki shrugged, pointing at the charging mob, growing closer and closer. I'm going to suggest that you and they are going to have more important things to worry about than the little details. Blaine had little time to argue, which he assumed was the point. They charged into them like a battering ram, which made blocking them off completely impossible. Had these been living men, they'd have been more careful. Blaine and Toki might have held the entire group off while each man took care not to be killed. The only men who engaged them were those they engaged with first. None of them seemed to care about being struck by a sword. They didn't bother to block attacks. They only swung wildly. Toki and Blaine had underestimated how difficult this type of fight would be, and the village was in serious danger. Of the 70 men who barreled into them, more than half had broken through and were inside the gate. Once inside, they scattered around and began attacking everyone. Toki and Blaine both ran inside after them, slashing down one after another. Toki and Blaine, both skilled sword masters in their own way, could not have been more different. Blaine fought like a man possessed to protect people who barely considered him human. He fought almost like the undead, with massive, powerful swings tearing completely through them with every single strike. He never let up and was quickly taking a toll as he accumulated several minor injuries, and his chest heaved with every desperate breath. It was clear to Toki that he was overdoing it and didn't care. Toki was surgical, methodical. No movement was wasted or unnecessary. She sliced at one foe, then glided to the next like a dancer, severing their necks or piercing vitals. Then, without even waiting to see them fall, disengaged and bound toward the most pressing foe. Seeing Blaine inspired her to push herself harder. She understood the reason for his desperation, after all. They hadn't let a single person die yet. Several of the villagers were injured, but none looked life-threatening. If they took a moment for even a single bit of respite, it would cost someone's life. Desperation was not something taught to Toki in her training. She was taught to be calm above all else. Emotions were your first enemy, and your external enemy was second. No show of emotion was allowed. Not happiness, not sadness, certainly not fear. Coral had taught Toki that one could be strong while still having emotions, especially as a woman. The thought of Coral only fueled the desperation growing in her heart. She was nearly panicked. Why wasn't Coral back yet? Toki took a blade across the shoulder from an enemy blindsiding her from her right. Before he could attack again, Blaine separated its head from his body. Keep your head or lose it, he shouted, turning to cut down another man, charging from behind. Her hands trembled. It wasn't her emotions getting the best of her. They'd been at this fight for a while now, and she had not trained diligently with a sword in years. Rather than keep her body and skills as sharp as she'd been taught, she preferred to keep everything secret and put all her practice into the bow, something she thought Coral would admire. She sucked in air, her vision blurring. At least 30 of them remained. There was an end in sight. They had to keep pushing. Blaine stumbled about now, his blade appearing to weigh 3 times what it did in the beginning. Both were covered in blood and didn't know how much of it was their own. Then an arrow flew by Toki and hit one of the undead. Not one shot haphazardly. The strike was perfect, so there couldn't be no mistake. Archers, fire at the legs! Ignore anything above the waist. This will give you more safe targets and take the pressure off those engaging, Coral shouted, pointing to the 2 cramped watchtowers. And vacate half your archers. This made a difference in short order, allowing the thinned-out archers room to fire at will and aim in wider arcs without endangering the person beside them. Leg strikes slowed down the undead charging, Blaine and Toki giving them more time and move between targets. At least, after a brief battle that felt like years, they defeated all their enemies. Without stopping for a much-needed breather, the three urgently rushed to help the wounded. Some were worse than others. Many would carry scars from the ordeals or have lifelong troubles from their injuries gained today. But by some miracle, not one soul died. The roaring cheers that erupted from the people sent chills down Toki's spine. What she was most surprised by wasn't that they won, unlikely as that was, or that no one had died, as impossible that might have seemed. What surprised Toki was the rush of villagers who ran to her and raised her on their shoulders into the air, cheering her name. Not once since she'd arrived had anyone treated her this way. It was too much for her, and she couldn't help but cry. Finally, they put her down, and she received many, some way too hard, pats on the back. Coral met her and grabbed her hand. "You're a hero, Toki. These people won't ever forget you. You see, I was right. I told you that people would come around, didn't I?" Coral was just as emotional as she was. She placed her hand behind Toki's head and pulled her in for a kiss, sending a wave of heat across her entire body. In front of everyone? These relationships weren't forbidden per se, but were frowned upon. Wouldn't this just make them find her disgusting again? Toki didn't care. She wrapped both arms around Coral. She was so happy to have her. The sudden chorus of laughter surprised her. She thought they were about to make fun of her, call her names, thank them one more time and tell them they should go. Only none of those things happened. The pats on the back returned from the men she'd just fought beside, followed by several whistles. Oh, they were teasing her all right, but not cruelly. They were teasing her the way Valmari friends often tease one another in the presence of someone they're romantically involved with. Blaine came up behind her and put his hand on her shoulder. "Enjoy this moment. They never last long. You've earned it." "You have too, Blaine. Thank you. This wouldn't have been possible if it weren't for you. I couldn't have done any of that without you," Toki replied, turning around and standing on the tips of her toes so she could pat Blaine on the shoulder. This made him smile with amusement. Considering what she'd just done with her sword, it was so strange to see just how tiny she was next to Blaine. Even next to Coral, she was small. "Don't mention it. Now we need to." The sound of a trumpet rang through the air, and the hooves of horses beat down on the earth. It was the sound of soldiers on horseback approaching the village. It can't be," Coral said. "I bet that's General Omari. The king must have heard about our fight and sent reinforcements." She squeezed Toki's hand. "We're going to put an end to Harding once and for all, despite his necromancer and wind mage." Toki nodded, her smile wide. The three of them made their way to the front gate. A man in ornate armor sat upon a massive warhorse at the head of a heavily armed unit of at least 500 men. "General, you're not a moment too soon. Quickly, we need to..." The general raised the front of his helmet, eyeing Coral down his nose with disgust. "That is not the proper way to greet your general, Commander." Coral collected herself, but was taken aback all the same. "Right," she said, saluting. "General Omari, Commander Coral, reporting." "Former Commander," he corrected. "You've been stripped of your title. Be thankful you do not face punishment, as the king has heard of your efforts since the fall of Al Company, and your loyalty to Velmar has moved him. If it were me, I would recommend your execution." Coral kneeled, saying nothing. What could she say? "Easy for a man to say when he shows up after the fight's over," Blaine said. "What's this? Are you collecting foreigners now, Coral? Another one? Tell your pet to shut his mouth before I step off the horse and teach him manners." "Dismount, then. I'm a foreigner, as you say, so I owe you no undeserved respect. It's not you who risked your life and limb for these villagers. I don't recall seeing you in the fight," Blaine said, resting his hand on his sword. General Omari smiled, adjusting his sword. "What is your name? You may have more than a lesson in manners coming to you, showing Velmar's general such disrespect." "Blaine Grave," Blaine said. "I'm traveling the island to learn to its convenience. I'm prepared to receive whatever lesson you'd like to impart. You're welcome to show me what Velmar's general can do with that sword on his hip." General Omari's smile faded quickly. He looked at Blaine, then looked back at his men. Looking to Blaine again, he mustered another laugh. "It's customary for us to give strangers a hard time. Surely you could take a jest," he said, eyeing Blaine's sword. "Forgive me, General. It was a long and difficult battle, and I'm clearly not accustomed to Velmari humor." General Omari nodded, turning his attention back to Coral. You are to return to the capital immediately. But I'm just following orders, Coral. It's what we do. It's what you must do. Considering you and your party are wounded, I can give you 3 days rest. After that, you must leave. Are you just going to let Hardin... Oh, Hardin? His Majesty has agreed to grant him asylum due to him being a wanted man in his own country. We've discovered that's the only reason he hasn't left yet. He has nowhere to go. The king has given him the mountain to use for 1 year. After that, Hardin has agreed to move on and find a more permanent home. And you believe that? Blaine asked. Do I look like the king to you, Blaine Grave? What difference would my answer make? Blaine sighed. The man had a point. I understand you. 3 days, Coral. Rest and return home. The king has granted you property and an honorable exit from your military service. Accept it gracefully and consider yourself lucky. Thank you for the message, General, Coral said, still bowing her head on one knee. I serve Elmar with all my heart. I put her safety above everything. General Omari saluted her, then nodded to Blaine and Toki before turning and riding off in the direction he came from. He didn't even offer the village aid, Toki said, before realizing Coral was still on her knee, staring at the ground. She kneeled beside her and put her arms around her shoulders. Am I really just to pack up and go home and accept that Hardin has immunity? Am I supposed to just forget everything he did? Forget our company? I don't deserve to be a commander or to escape punishment, but... Neither does Hardin, Blaine said, finishing her thought. Velmar's king isn't my king, nor do I have one. I don't follow his orders. I will go after Hardin regardless. Not alone. Tomorrow, we ride for the mountain together, Coral said. Tomorrow? Toki said, startled to her feet. If I've guessed correctly, Hardin has desperately collected bodies to create a show of force and spread rumors. He doesn't have an army, and his necromancer can't make more easily. Not without bodies, Coral said. Nor at heavy a cost, Blaine added. A necromancer offers a bit of their own life force to create these. They don't do so lightly. Coral nodded. This certainly supported her theory. He's played his hand and we destroyed his last bluff. He's up on that mountain defenseless, hoping the king isn't foolish enough to accept his threats as truth. We haven't dealt with magic here before. The prospect of a necromancer running amok is terrifying to the king. Blaine nodded. I had the same thought. Coral rose to her feet, turning to face the two of them. I'm sure the villagers want to celebrate with us. Enjoy the feast, but go easy on the drinks. Tomorrow, we end this. Ah! Just in time for an ad break. We're on chapter 12. The internet's struggling. Yeah, the internet, I see it. The internet is definitely struggling, but hopefully it'll make it through this ad break and then fix itself out again. We can only hope anyway. We'll sip on some water for the next 1 minute while we wait for this ad break. So we have 4 more chapters to go. Ish. Something like that. And I think the epilogue. But the epilogue is short, so. And it's 9:30, so I think we'll finish a lot. Yeah, I'm buffering a good 30 seconds to a minute behind. Yeah. Well, at least it's still holding out, though, even if it is, like, running on bare bones currently. Oh, my nose is still bothering me so much. I think I might have a sinus infection here. 15 seconds. I can't wait to finish my first donation panel tomorrow. I don't know whether or not I want to wait. I think I'll wait until I have the other ones done before like putting my panels up, because I kind of want them to look uniform, even though they're not going to be uniform at all. But they're all going to be this like the same style. All right, ad break's over. Time to get to chapter 12. And hopefully the internet doesn't die, but it does look like I'm watching my stream in another window, and it does look like I'm behind. Oh no, did it finally go out? It was a good thing I realized before over a minute now. Yeah. Oh, we haven't lost it. Okay. Okay, good. Okay. Chapter 12. That night, the village celebrated, throwing a feast for their 3 heroes. The 3 of them ate their first legitimate meal in days. Days for Coral and Toki, at least. No telling how long for Blaine. To hear the man talk, he was seeming more animal than man. a warrior in the truest form, but also a scholar who had taken a keen interest in magic in other cultures. He told them about the Holy Maiden and Arthurus and how she'd formed an unlikely union with the only living witch, thus ending the long-running executions that had nearly collapsed the city. He told them about necromancy and explained more about the price that must be paid to use it. It seemed most magic came at some kind of price. They paid particular attention to his explanation of the necromancers, so that would probably come in handy soon. Their golems sounded like the most problematic because they kept near their creators and were much more powerful than the undead they raised from corpses. It's possible I may have killed the necromancers earlier, Coral suggested. A man was riding on a strange horse. No arrow could kill it, and I tried many. It was also extremely nimble, despite being much bigger than even a workhorse. I killed the one riding it. Blaine nodded, rubbing his chin and taking a swig of his beer. What happened to the horse after you killed the rider? It retreated, Coral said with a firm nod. Blaine sighed. Then I'm afraid that wasn't our necromancer. When a necromancer dies, their golem falls to dust. Though if it's as powerful as you say, we may know what the golem is at least. I've seen two. One was a human-like woman, but I'm told she was very much the exception. The other was a massive wolf-man hybrid, though they can also pour more of their power into the undead that they raise to make them exceptional. That's probably what the necromancer did with the rider, and maybe the horse too. Toki twirled a knife between her fingers, listening closely. I can dispel magic with the sword technique, or, I should say, the effects of magic. Can dispel it from the air or within a person's body, to a degree. It's how I could drop the undead with only minor wounds compared to yours, Mr. Grave. That intrigued Blaine, rotating his chair to face Toki. Is that a type of magic? Toki shook her head. No, we recognize magic as life energy. Everyone has some kind of life energy, and they manifest it in different ways, either through natural-born gifts, or in your case, Blaine, intense training and practice. You can continue fighting when most men would collapse. Perhaps even die from exhaustion. This isn't that much different from magic. I see. I saw a woman fling fireballs from her hands that could melt steel as thick as my body in seconds. Could you dissipate something like that? I wouldn't want to try, to be honest with you. By the time it was close enough for me to dismantle it, it might already be too late. It would probably be better just to avoid getting on a witch's bad side. Blight nodded and turned up his beer, finishing it and sliding it toward the woman who was already carrying a refill his way. She winked at him, and he nodded gratefully before she walked away. Pretty girl there, Coral said, nudging him. Not the right time in my life for such a thing, and I wouldn't dare toy with a young girl's heart for something temporary, he said. An answer he'd obviously given many times, to come so naturally to him. Coral and Toki looked at one another. Blaine really was an odd one. I think that's very kind of you, Blaine, Toki said, smiling. I say enjoy life while it lasts. A wanderer like you won't live forever, Toki said, prompting a gasp from Toki. Is that what you're doing with me? Taking advantage of me, Toki said, grabbing onto her arm. Coral pulled her close and kissed her on the cheek. You wish, but speaking of you, I want to know more. What are these 12 princes Blaine mentioned? Was your father one of them? Toki frowned, recoiling a bit. It's all right if you don't want to talk about it. You don't have to. Sorry I sprung it on you like that. Toki shook her head. No, it's all right. I kept it from you, so I owe you an explanation. My father was one of the 12 princes. One of 12 men who excel in every aspect of our people's cultural values and swordsmanship. They're the personal guards of the Emperor, who himself was one of them in his youth. A man is expected to have many sons and choose a suitable one among them to take on this training. Starts from just a baby. They train them in things such as simple as grip and swimming, tolerance of pain, and so on. But you're a girl, Coral said. Thank you for noticing, Toki said, smiling. Oh, I noticed, Coral said, wagging her eyebrows. Toki blushed, nearly forgetting her place in the story. Right. Some about how a girl was picked. Oh, well, I had 2 brothers who both died very young. My mother died giving birth to me. My father was desperate to hold on to his position and not bring shame to our family's name. Thus he created the ruse that I was a boy. He taught me to hide it from everyone, and for a while it seemed it would work. I was a natural with a sword, excelling above even some boys being trained, despite being younger. I'm sorry, that sounds awful, Blaine said. I haven't gotten to the awful part yet. Becoming a young woman comes with certain changes in the body, as you both know, and things became harder to hide, especially living so closely with others who assumed I was a boy. One day they discovered my bloody undergarments as I was preparing to clean them. Chaos broke out, and they stripped me down in front of everyone. My father got the worst of it. They tortured him for days, then executed him under orders of the emperor. Despite his self-serving motives, my father always treated me well. I was devastated. Cole reached out and clutched Toki's hand tightly. Toki looked out at their hands and forced a smile. I was told that I would choose to embark on an important mission to Nethalos and learn as much as I could about kingdoms here. One day I was returned to my homeland and informed the emperor. On the trip here, my entire crew died except for the captain, who died shortly after we arrived. I realized that this was basically a suicide mission. I knew it before we even departed. Something convenient to get rid of me without having to deal with me there. They are certain I'm dead, and I'm certain I'm happy to keep it that way. I have no intention of ever returning, and had no intention of ever drawing my sword again. Velmar is my home now. If it's all right with you, can I never mention that place again? Coral hugged Toki. Of course. I'll never mention it again. Thank you for telling me. It's their loss, Blaine said, slamming down his beer. Of the hundreds of swordsmen I've faced, you're the first to best me when I've given it my all. Toki and Coral both smiled. You really are like a man from a storybook, Blaine Grave. You'll make a fine husband someday, Coral said. You seem determined to marry me off, Coral. Are you a matchmaker? Coral raised her hands, giving up on the matter. Fair enough, I'll leave it be. So what's your story? No idea who my father was. My mother sent me to serve the church as a young man because she couldn't afford to take care of me. We weren't originally from Arthurus, but that's about all I know. One day I was watching the knights train, and they took a liking to me, asking me to help with polishing armor, delivering blades for sharpening, and so on. One man asked me to spar, and it surprised them to see how well I could handle the sword. They asked me if I had any training, and I told them I hadn't. So you lied to them, Coral said. I did. I had purchased the diamond sword from the blacksmith and trained with it in private. Though to admit such a thing would have gotten me into a lot of trouble. Shortly after this, there was a tournament held for aspiring knights, and I won. The Duke was there and requested that I become his bodyguard instead. He wasn't so bad in those days, but far from a good man. See, not very exciting. People have made up a lot of rumors about who I am and where I come from just to make it interesting. I like some of them. My story is much the same, Coral said. I joined the military to escape my arranged marriage. I learned the bow because the boys bullied me with the sword when we trained. The king had just legalized women entering the military, but it was very much frowned upon. Eventually, I proved myself in several battles, and the king appointed me to Owl Company. Just for show, mind you. I purchased Toki from a slave auction because of how cute she was, and you know the rest. A slave? Blaine said, his face tense. Slavery is something that happens to prisoners of war, children of criminals, and others in similar situations, Toki said. The new king dislikes it and argues with his advisors and nobles regularly about it. As time goes on, fewer and fewer will engage in it because they know it costs them favor with the king. In a few years, it will be a thing of the past. A man with some backbone wouldn't need a few years, Blaine said. Coral looked around, thankful no one had heard him speak so poorly of their king in front of everyone. You really speak your mind, don't you, Blaine? Royalty isn't something I've become fonder of in my travels, Coral. Noted. I'm going to turn in. Obviously, I don't have any right to judge you. I'm probably going to lose my head over this. Or not. The favor of a king is a fickle thing, he said, standing to his feet and walking away. I'll see you in the morning. Toki squeezed Coral's arm and smiled. Before you even ask, I'm not going anywhere. I'm seeing this through with you until the end, regardless of what you say. Coral sighed. Toki knew her too well. I thought you might say that. That's the end of chapter 12. It looks like the internet is still struggling, but we are making it. We have, I think, a few chapters left. And again, if you would like to check out the books and the rest of the series, this book is called A Kiss of Iron and You. Each book is written kind of independent of each other with, like, they're all separate stories and separate characters except for Blaine. So, you know, each book is a different couple in a different area, which is pretty cool. I like it. So there's lots of world building in these books too. But at least the internet is still holding up. But it's in the pinned comment if you want to check it out. So, Mr. Bogath has lots of different books. All right, chapter 13. The next morning, each of them were checked out by the village physicians and obviously not cleared for what they were about to do. After a hearty breakfast, the three of them departed and made their way toward the mountain. How long has it been since we slept in a bed, Toki? Coral asked, stretching her arms as they rode. Oh, I don't know. Weeks at least. I guess I haven't really thought about it. How about you, Blaine? First time since I've been in Belmar. Everyone's rooms were full, as you might imagine. Coral sighed. Right, I can imagine. The village we left is a sign of the times. Mark my words. Give it 10 years and everyone will be like them. Try not to hold it against the Belmari people. They're just following what they've seen and what they've been taught. They're learning better, and our new king is helping matters. You have high praise for a king who doesn't seem to think as highly as you, Blaine said, arching a brow. Getting to know Toki has made this an important issue for me, Blaine. Besides, he isn't punishing me. Likely he's just satisfying people who, like the general and other commanders who objected to making me a commander. Well, he's going to punish me after this. Not that we'll survive, necessarily. Belmar will become more tolerant of others by your example, Coral. I wouldn't go dying so quickly. Kings can change their minds if their leverage changes. And if it turns out he doesn't actually condemn you like you think, you may be surprised. You don't have to change the kingdom, Coral. Besides... Blaine held up his hand, cutting them off. Of course, Coral said, drawing her bow as several undead attackers emerged from the forest, chasing them as they galloped ahead. Should we retreat? If this is a trap, going further in will make it worse. The final bluff, Toki. Do you trust me? Coral asked. Completely, Toki said, drawing her sword. Trust doesn't factor in for me, Blaine added, drawing in his own sword. I'm going in anyway. Whether the trip is 2 ways or 1 way makes no difference to me. You've officially joined a Valmari mission, Blaine Grave, and I'm giving you an order. Approach this mission with the goal of succeeding while also surviving. If you're fine with dying, that's exactly what you'll do. Blaine grinned and relented. Aye, Commander. Now, shall we deal with these pursuers or try to leave them far enough behind? I counted nearly 50. We deal with them, Coral shouted, stopping her horse abruptly and turning on the road. Stay on horseback and deal with them carefully. We have time, so don't take any risks by dismounting. Toki and Blaine nodded, charging toward opposite sides of the mob. They could only take out 1 or 2 with each pass, but Coral found dealing with them easier. When one neared her horse, she just charged away until she put some distance between them, then shot more. Continue our steady charge to the summit, but slowly. Circle and take out as many as you can on my signal, Coral shouted. This process continued. Coral maintained a pace that would make it easy to stay ahead of their pursuers, while also avoiding unnecessary stress to the horses. When they'd thinned down the force to less than 10, she gave the order to dismount and finish them. Blaine and Toki stood in front of Coral, blocking her from being targeted as she fired off arrows unhindered. In moments, they were all dealt with. From their flank, a body came flying toward Blaine. He had only a moment to dodge it, and a moment wasn't enough. His horse made it mere steps before it made impact, hitting his horse and knocking it to the ground. With him still on the saddle, pinning his leg under him. Blaine! Toki shouted, turning to help him. Toki! Coral whirled, stopping in her tracks. Blaine will be all right for a moment. You know what to do. The wind mage had returned, eager to finish them. He spun in the air around his hands as he hovered toward them. A burst of wind shook the leaves from the trees on its way to them, but Coral aimed her bow with confidence. Get ready, Toki said, holding her sword in a tight stance, different from the one she'd used before. Emperor's benevolent stance, gentle summer breeze. Toki swung her sword in several graceful arcs, appearing to attack nothing. When the attack would have landed, it was as harmless as a puff of wind from her own lips. The mage fell from the air and struggled to regain altitude. Likely, this was the last thing he ever expected. Coral let loose an arrow, which sent through the man's cheeks and passed cleanly. By the time she'd summoned the magic to regain his flight, she'd sent another into his shoulder. As he turned to retreat, she sent another into his leg. By now, Blaine had made it to his feet and struggled to get back into the saddle. Coral pointed to him. Blaine, pursue him to buy us time. Keep pressure on him so he can't rest. Ride after him for as long as he'll run. If he turns to fight, flee yourself. Blaine's target was hardened, but he made no argument. Coral knew what she was doing, and by now he trusted her judgment. There simply wasn't time to argue anyway. With his leg injury, he was limited to what he could do from his horse. He could still walk, but walking wouldn't be enough. Toki tossed him her pouch of throwing knives as she sped past. "Good luck, Blaine," she yelled behind him. "Time to go, Toki. Blaine is buying us the only window we have. We can't find them both at once, and you won't surprise him with that technique next time." Toki leaped back onto her horse, and the two of them raced up the mountain. To their surprise, there was no more resistance. Not once in the nearly half hour it took them to ride up the trail to the summit. When they arrived, all that greeted them was a frail-looking man sitting at a table in the middle of a clearing where a camp had once been. No way this was Hardin. "So, not even one of the most skilled mages in Estonia could deter you. I'll not ask what you did to buy his mercy, but clearly he has let you go by choice, if you're here. His betrayal was inevitable," the man said, sipping from a cup he picked off the table. "Come, have a seat. I assume you're here to meet with me." "We're happy with the seats we have, General. I'm Commander Cole Sumari of the Owl Company, and I'm here to accept your unconditional surrender. This isn't a negotiation." "Do commanders outrank generals and kings in this country, my dear?" Hardin's gentle face might have suggested he was a loving father or a wise scholar, but nothing gave away that he was the man who had earned a reputation as Moira's most feared general. Those few who survived battles he'd taken part in, you would half expect the man to be 20 feet tall and made of fire. "Or are you just late hearing the news? Shall I show you the treaty I just signed with your king?" He reached onto the table, placing his hand on a parchment, but Coral fired an arrow into it before he could pick it up. He did not react, simply moved his eyes from the paper to Coral. "Is that enough answer for you?" Coral said, knocking another arrow. "As you can see, I'm not in the best of health these days. The many years of battle have taken a toll on me, and I'm no longer a man in his prime. When you've been in as many as I have, you'll understand." Toki tugged at Coral's sleeve, her hand trembling. "Coral—" "I know, Toki," she whispered. "On 3. Toki nodded as subtly as she could. Coral placed the hand behind her back and took a step forward so Toki could see it. She held up one finger. "The king doesn't understand what you're doing," Coral said, holding up 2 fingers behind her back. "Or he's wise enough not to test me," Hardin replied, tapping a finger on the table. He whistled, but Coral wasn't about to lose focus. "Or he's gullible enough to think that you pose a threat at all anymore," Coral said calmly, before flashing 3 fingers behind her back and snapping that same hand back to her bow, firing an arrow directly toward his chest. In what seemed like a single motion, Hardin kicked the table up between himself and the arrow. Then, at the moment the arrow struck, sliced through the heavy table using a long axe. He struck the table with such force that it sent shards of wood toward them, traveling nearly as fast as the arrow Coral had shot. Toki had dismounted to charge him, but immediately had to dive for cover instead. Coral was struck with a few, and many fatally wounded her horse, sending it toppling to the ground. It had saved her from nearly all the shards. Luckily, she could leap away in time to avoid serious injury from the rest. "Take my horse, Coral! Bleh," Toki shouted, running toward Hardin. He was now running atop the same horse Coral had encountered just the day before. He was the necromancer, and the horse was his golem. Toki attempted to ready the stance she'd used on the wind mage, but was overwhelmed too quickly. She only had time to block the mounted strike from Hardin's axe, sending her tumbling to the ground. The horse moved impossibly fast, and many times faster than the day before. They remembered Blaine telling them about a golem's power increasing when it was near to its master. If only they'd realized the necromancer was Hardin himself. Coral fired another shot, and Hardin instinctively dodged. This is what Coral had counted on. His dodge had actually put him in the arrow's path. She'd only had to guess whether he'd dodge right or left, and fortunately she'd guessed correctly. The arrow struck him in the chest and knocked him from the horse. Before he could hit the ground, the horse moved with speed difficult for the eye to follow and made a small circle back to catch him. Hardin ripped the arrow from his chest and threw it to the ground. He charged toward Toki with his axe held high, but Toki had already prepared for this. She could only partially complete the technique, but Hardin's horse fell apart as it charged. With a quick step forward, Toki sliced the horse's neck, and it collapsed in the dust. As he fell, Hardin plunged his axe forward, obscured by the cloud of dust, and caught Toki in the side. She'd seized the handle before it could go in deeper, though the wound was still serious. Hardin pressed into this attack with all his might, as Toki stabbed her sword forward, piercing slightly into his chest before he could stop it with his left hand. The two were in a stalemate now, but not in Toki's favor. Hardin's strength was many times her own moments before. Fortunately, 2 things had just weakened him. One was the destruction of his golem. The other was Toki's blade piercing his chest. She'd been able to dissipate the effects of magical power on his strength. Still, the man was an impressive warrior. Despite his appearance, his strength seemed to rival Blaine's. Toki clenched her teeth, giving one final push. She pressed against his axe, pushed it away from her, and leaned harder into the sword's piercing attack. The dust from his golem had shrouded them without Toki noticing or being able to stop it. It hid them from Coral's sight. By the time she ran to them, it would be over. Toki knew that now. Exhausting the last of her reserves, she was losing this battle of raw strength. Hardin seemed to draw upon something almost limitless. It must have been his life force. He was willing to die in order to kill her. If he was going down, he was going to take her with him. Hardin pulled Toki's sword out of his flesh, allowing him to further draw his magical power. He pulled his axe from her side and kicked her to the ground, ripping the sword from her grip and tossing it aside. Was this going to be the end for her? She attempted to move out of the way, but lacked the strength for even that. An arrow appeared in Hardin's neck, as though it had just manifested there. The dust was so thick that she'd not even been able to see the path of the flight. Hardin roared out, bringing the axe down toward Toki. Another arrow hit him in the chest, sending him stumbling to the side and missing her entirely. Toki seized her chance, rolling her sword, picking up and slicing at Hardin's chest. He attempted to block, but was too slow. Toki's sword found its mark. Hardin fell to the ground, and the dust around them fell with him. "Toki!" Coral screamed, throwing her bow to the side and running to support her as she swayed, looking as though she might fall. She eased her onto the ground. "Let me see," she said, pulling Toki's hand away. "I'm not going to die, Coral. The next blow would have done the trick if you hadn't hit him. Good shooting, by the way." Coral put her hands over his face and wiped tears away, trying and failing to make it subtle. "Aw, you were going to scream, 'Toki, no,' as loud as you could and cry over me like a tragic hero." "That's adorable," Toki said, smiling. Coral laughed, choking back tears and wiping her eyes again before reaching into her pack and rummaging for first aid supplies. Once she'd taken temporary care of the wound, what little she could, she readied her only remaining horse. "Let's go," she said, picking up Toki in her arms and helping her onto the back and hopping up onto the front. "Do you think it'll be over now?" Toki asked, hopeful. Coral shook her head, spurring her horse down the path to the base of the mountain. "No, Toki, it's not over yet." Waiting at the bottom of the mountain was exactly what Coral had been expecting. General Omari stood with a much smaller unit, who appeared at ease. At first, she thought they had captured Blaine, but he seemed to wait with them of his own accord. As they rode toward the group, General Omari motioned for his men to stand at attention and face them. Toki was unconscious now, slouching against Coral's back. "Toki was wounded badly. She needs a healer right now," Coral said, interrupting General Omari as he was about to speak. We didn't come here to give medical aid to foreigners, Coral. You violated the king's decree. 2 of them, actually. I'm taking you into custody and bringing you back to the capital myself." Coral readied her bow quicker than any of Omari's men could respond, leveling an arrow directly at him. "If you let her die, you go with her. If you want me to go peacefully, I want your word that you'll give her attention right now and deliver her to a hospital in the capital." Omari sighed, nodding to Blaine, who pulled Toki from the horse. 2 men rushed to her, tending to her wound. "I don't want to be here any more than you do, Coral, but don't ask for another concession. It's only because of my respect for you that you've received this one." Coral put away her bow and dismounted from the horse, holding out her arms for Omari to place shackles on them, but he shook his head. "You've avenged our company. I trust you won't escape. Escorting a Velmari commander back in chains is a poor look for our military." "Suit yourself," Coral said. She looked at Blaine, hoping for some kind of sign about the wind mage. She got one, but it wasn't good. He only frowned and shook his head. Likely tucked his tail in between his legs and limped home to Estania. Good enough. Velmar was finally free from Hardin's grasp. This is the end of chapter 13. Okay, now I'll catch up to chat. I have been drinking after every chapter. And yeah, our internet is atrocious. It looks like it's actually being like caught up now, so yeah, the upload rate is so slow because I'm looking at OBS and now the upload speed is back up to where it should be. Yeah, so I don't know if we should even switch. Really? The new ISP, I think, is a fiber company, or it has fiber, something. Oh, interesting. It's not showing me being able to snooze ads right now, but I'm gonna snooze this ad. Okay. Mr. Bogath, if I'm reading this next chapter, if the ad break comes up, can you snooze the next chapter? Can you snooze the next ad? I snoozed the first ad at the very beginning, but then I guess technically... Yeah, I just saw myself. I've been watching my own stream to see how bad this buffer is. Alright. I could snooze 2 more ads because I didn't snooze any ads after the stream. After the internet died last time, so... Anyway. Now I got my water and caught up with chat. Ouch. 5 minutes. That's rough. But it looks like I'll be good for the rest of the stream, at least. It's 10 o'clock. We got 2 chapters left here. Chapter 14. 1 month later. They escorted Coral, Toki, and Blaine to a waiting room, awaiting their audience with the king. There would be no trial, since the charges were all stemmed from violating his decrees. The 3 hadn't seen one another in a month. When Coral saw Toki, her eyes welled with tears. "You look wonderful," she said. "Because I actually look wonderful, or because I'm alive?" she asked, smiling. "Both," Coral replied, walking to Toki's seat and hugging her. This prompted very unhappy looks from the guards who were watching them, but not enough to warrant intervention. Blaine simply shrugged at them, which seemed to make them relax more. "All right, you 3, a short, bald man said, as he entered the room. "You'll now have your audience with the Majesty. This way." He offered no opportunity for question or comment before returning to leave the room. They followed, with the 2 guards following behind. Coral had expected this to be a quiet affair because of the embarrassment of having a commander defy a royal decree so openly. Instead, the royal chamber was packed with observers, including all the king's advisors and top military officers. It didn't matter. She was prepared to accept anything. She'd been willing to die for this, so any humiliation she suffered now felt trivial. It was her plan to beg for mercy for Toki and Blaine, and request any of their punishments be heaped upon her own instead. "First, Coral Sumari," King Luther said calmly, pointing to the podium in the center of the room. "Please give those present your reasoning for your actions." That she could do. It was simple. She stepped to the podium, took in a deep breath, and spoke. "I did it because I have a depthless love and hope for Velmar's future. You may think these words are hollow, but it doesn't matter to me who believes it. I will only speak the truth." "Not because of a bloody vendetta to avenge Owl Company?" he asked, rubbing his chin. "That, too," Coral said. King Luther nodded. "Did you know General Omari submitted a letter in your support, risking his own career in the process?" Coral was shocked. "No, I wasn't aware." "He called you a true patriot of Velmar, though, with or without his letter, I'm inclined to agree. I will tell you something that a king is never supposed to say. Even kings can be wrong sometimes. Had you obeyed my decree, there's no telling what might have happened. We found writings to show General Hardin's plan to amass an army with pressure removed. Thus, here is my punishment for you," he said, picking up a document from a table next to his throne and holding it up. "You are henceforth Duchess Coral Sumari. I am giving you that land that includes Tusk Mountain and 3 surrounding villages, one of which you and your friends here saved. You must accept this charge and the burdens that come with it. We will look forward to your counsel in the coming days as someone looking to Velmar's future." Gasps and chatter filled the room, but quickly silenced when the king raised his hand. "Toka Takihashi, step forward and stand beside your former commander." Toki, regardless of how strong she was extremely sheepish in front of crowds like this, especially with the venomous glares that were practically piercing her flesh. So many here were disgusted by her very presence. Yes, Your Majesty," she said, standing beside Coral. "You are henceforth a free and full citizen of Velmar. In addition, I am awarding you with the highest commendation as a member of the Velmar military can receive, a Star of Bravery. This comes with the title Hero of Velmar. These are because of your actions in leading a defense of Tusk Village against a large enemy force. Not one of Velmar's citizens perished, I am told. More gasps filled the room, though they were more subdued this time. Now the king was paying attention. His eyes were following the faces of most of the room. Most played the game of nobility well and put on a stone face now, regardless of their feelings. General Amari stepped toward Toki, holding the medallion in his hand. She bent forward and he placed it around her neck. He took a step back, giving her a strong salute without a hint of emotion. Blaine Grave, the king said, waving his hand. Blaine stood beside Coral, offering her a smile before turning his attention to the king. I have little love for what brought you to our country. You took your personal vendetta to a foreign land. You ignored the decree of that land's king, and you insulted my throne in the presence of my top general. Your brazen actions here are, each of them, worthy of harsh punishment. Coral opened her mouth to speak, but Blaine elbowed her and shook his head. Many nods and more chatter filled the room, this time in agreement with the king's words. However, he continued, you placed your life on the line in assisting a Velmari hero defend a village you had no ties with and a land you had no fealty to. You assisted a former Velmari commander, now Duchess, in removing the greatest threat to my people. Again, although they are not your fellow countrymen. With these things all considered, punishing you would surely call into question my judgment as king. The people would ask whether I'm more loyal to the whims of the nobility or the safety of my people. I will make that answer clear today. My people come first. You will face no punishment. You are free to stay in our kingdom for as long as you wish, and all your needs will be met while you do. Stay here where you wish, eat what you wish, or even build a home here if that's what you want. If you decide to move on, our armory will outfit you with everything you need for your journey to continue. Blaine bowed his head. Thank you, Your Majesty. Now, he continued, I will close this ceremony by offering each of you one request. If it was within my power, I will grant it. Toki, we will begin with you. Toki swallowed hard and trembled. She knew what she wanted to say, but face to face with the king, she lost nerve. Coral reached down and clasped her hand. Some in the room noticed. More gasps. I wish for slavery to end and all slaves to be free effective immediately. Several men in the room stood to their feet, no longer content to stay quiet. Your Majesty, our economy will suffer if you do something so hasty, a man shouted. Secretary, you will conduct yourself with dignity in this room, or your post will be given to someone who can. The man fell back into his chair as the kick there. But, Your Majesty! There aren't many slaves anyway, King Luther said, slapping the arm of his throne. Very well, it is done. I will draft up a decree to read to all citizens tomorrow. I shall abolish slavery. Toki nearly collapsed herself, holding her hands over her mouth in shock. She never dreamed he would grant such a massive request, and certainly not that it would be because of her. The king's guard assembled and placed their hands on their weapons. Coral, what is your request? Mine is simple, Your Majesty, she said, smiling, showing that it would be anything but simple, and that she was enjoying the moment, perhaps a little more than she should. I wish to marry the one I love. A modest request, one I would have granted anyway. Tell me, what is this man's name? Her name is Toki Takahashi, Your Majesty. It's the only thing I want now. I hope you'll grant this marriage to me. You know that such a marriage is against our laws. I snoozed it. There we go. I'm aware, but you don't have to grant this request, Your Majesty, but it is truly my only one. I have no other ask for it. I have no other to ask for in its place. Gasping, gawking, and protests erupted again, despite the king's use of guard to enforce our... I just got this one, so I think we're out of snoozes. After considering for a moment, he shook his head. I'm afraid I can't agree with that. This was a significant event, so I'm already making many concessions for you and rewarding you generously. Abolishing slavery will come with risks for me. Allowing 2 women to marry is too much right now. Perhaps in a few years, it can be considered. Coral frowned, squeezing Toki's hand. That's not to say your relationship will not be tolerated. That is the least we can do, given your contributions and honesty. You could have hidden this, as many nobles can and do, with far worse. And instead, you trusted me to treat you fairly. Coral put her hand around Toki's waist and bowed slightly. I'm grateful. Blaine Grave, what is your request? I request you take back every reward offered to me. After all, I already have everything I need, and will leave within the year. I will instead echo Coral's request. Having sought beside her, it would bring me endless shame to accept any kind of reward or have any request granted, knowing she could not be granted hers. The nerve! A woman shrieked. Ungrateful dog, roared another man. The king sighed, relaxing into his throne. You are truly a bold man, Bladegrave. Very well. If I'm going to cause a stir with one decree, especially one as significant as abolishing slavery, this may be the best timing for such a concession after all. Likely this will seem like a small thing when the two are compared. Duchess Coral Sumari, I shall grant you your request for marriage. Coral and Toki embraced tightly. Coral picked her up and spun her around. After a moment, the chatter quieted on its own as everyone watched them. Some still looked on with disgust, but the faces of many others changed. Now I believe there's a matter of land dispute I need to hear, the king asked one of his advisors standing nearby, essentially shutting down any chance for disagreement from observers and other advisors who seemed eager to voice their concerns. That's all. You three are free to go, he said, smiling and turning his attention away from them. Perhaps your king is a little better than I thought, Blaine whispered to Coral, who nudged him. Will you at least stay for the wedding? Toki asked. Wouldn't miss it for the world. Actually, I do have a request, not for the king, but for you, he said. Fine, I'll train you, but after that I'm putting away for good. It just isn't the life I want. This is, she said, putting her arms around Coral. Blaine nodded, attempting to hide his frown with a practiced smile. Perhaps better than anyone else, he understood that choice all too well. When the three of them emerged from the palace and began walking down the stairs, Coral swept Toki off her feet without warning and kissed her, misjudging the bottom step and sending both of them toppling into the grass below. Everyone around them laughed. Toki and Coral couldn't have been happier. That is the last chapter. We are now on the epilogue. Let me take a quick break. Take a sippy sip. I cannot snooze the last ad. So, last ad will be in like 2 minutes or so. But I'll stop. I might actually be able to read this epilogue before that happens. I accidentally squirted the water on myself. Oops. Anyway, epilogue. 6 months later. The construction is coming along nicely, Toki said, hugging Coral's arm. We should be able to finish it this week. The two of them smiled as they stood in front of their nearly completed home. Coral pointed to Blaine, hoisting a giant beam on his shoulder and putting it in its place. Good idea making Blaine pay for his training this way, Coral said. We've all spent a lot of time working on it, plus all the volunteers from the village we had to turn away. Besides, Blaine insisted on helping. I never asked him to. Coral laughed. No need to be defensive. I know you didn't. He's done well with the bow, too. I'm actually sad to see the man leave. They've been happy to have him telling stories at the inn, and we could have built him a home here, too. The place has gotten a lot more popular now that a duchess and her wife lives here. Toki beamed at her wife remark. That's me, she said, hugging Coral's arm even tighter. No more swords, no more hunting criminals, just quiet. You make me so happy, Toki said, continuing to beam. Coral nodded toward Blaine, strapping his bags to his horse. Looks like the wanderer is ready to move on. Shall we see him off? Toki nodded, loosening her grip a little to make it easier for them to walk. Talk to him a moment. I need to get something, Coral said, letting go of her arm and running away suddenly. Toki sighed. Typical Coral. Leaving so soon, Blaine? You're not even close to mastering the technique yet. Didn't you say that would take years? He asked, smiling. Sure, but all you can do now is deflect magic that's left the user. You can't weaken the magic in their body or even dissipate it. Good enough, he said, cinching up his saddle. Where have you decided to go? Estonia. The weather's nice there this time of year, and I'm eager to see this famed technology they're always boasting about. Wind-driven machinery. Truly something. You're more of a huntsman than a swordsman, you know. You're curious about the wind mage who is helping Hardin. You want to know who he is, and you want to hold him accountable. I hope one day you find something worth giving it up for, like I have, Toki said, nodding toward Coral, who was walking toward them. The things I love I love enough that I don't want to give them up anytime soon. Swordsmanship, traveling, hunting, as you called it. Once I was tied to a master and lived a life of service. Never again. I almost made a big mistake and came off lucky. From then on, I followed my instinct. Good, you held him here for me, Coral said, breathing heavy, carrying a large blanket. A gift for you. Blaine took the blanket and unrolled it. A ranger's bow, short and compact, just like she'd been teaching him how to use these past 3 months. Thank you, Coral. Now that I can use one of these, I'll carry it with me always. He fit the sling over his pack, and Coral helped him get it adjusted properly. A small quiver nestled perfectly into place beside it. He turned to look at both of them, clearing his throat. Well, this is goodbye, he said, taking a deep breath and sighing. Toki stepped toward him and offered him a hug, which he returned happily. Coral did the same. Goodbye, Blaine, Coral said, wiping her eye. Live a happy life, all right, he said, mounting his horse. He turned to leave, stopping one more time to face them, offering one last smile and wave. Coral looked down at Toki, lifting her chin and giving her a quick kiss. I have a surprise for you, too. For me? Toki asked, but I'm not going anywhere. Oh, come on, just play along, Coral said, pulling inside their home and into one of the finished rooms. Sit on the bed and close your eyes. I'm liking this surprise already, Toki said. Coral put her hands on her hips, shooting Toki a glare. Just close your eyes. When Toki closed them, Coral placed her sword in her lap. Toki opened her eyes, gently running her fingers along the red ribbon that had tightly bound the blade's guard to the scabbard. This is the ribbon from your hair. You wore it on our wedding day, Toki said, her eyes welling with tears. Coral went down to her knees, kneeling in front of Toki. I promise to protect and care for you with all of my heart, so you will never have to draw this sword, ever again. Oh, Coral, Toki squeaked, setting the sword aside and leaning forward, placing her hands on Coral's cheeks. They stared into each other's eyes for a moment before Toki leaned in and kissed her deeply. I love you, Toki, Coral said. I love you, Toki replied. Ha! I did it! I did it before the ad, except for now there's going to be an ad. Alright, let's see. Who do I want to raid today? Thank you for the hydrate, Poltervine. Woo! So that was A Kiss of Ironing You by Mr. Brogath. If you'd like to check it out, it is still pinned in the link. The link is still pinned in the comments. Good, I said that backwards. I had to rephrase that. Anyway, I hope you all have a nice night. I'm going to pick somebody to raid. Thank you, Poltervine, for joining in. Let's see. I haven't raided Rare Machine in a while, so let's raid Rare Machine. Mr. Brogath, can you put up a raid message? Oops. Rare Machine. Alright. So tomorrow is going to be Arta Belinda Sunday. We're going to finish up the donation panel and then play some Final Fantasy 14. It probably won't take us like an hour or whatever to finish up. But we're going to finish up my first panel. I am going to take the entire next week off because I can only stream Monday because I'm leaving town for a few days. So I just decided that it would just be best if I just took the week off. So I'm going to put that on my Twitch and everything. So there isn't going to be a schedule this week. Yes, Dragon Raid. Hello, Jeff A. Kronos. Just about to raid somebody. But anyway, I'll see you guys tomorrow at 2 p.m. for Art of Belinda Sunday. Thank you for subscribe. Thank you for following. But anyway, I'll see you guys tomorrow at 2 p.m. I'm gonna switch to my ending soon screen. Poltervine just gonna spam Dragon Raid until we go. Good night, everybody.